Hey everyone, I'm AfterMoon Horrors. Before we dive into the story, I want to know, where are you watching from and what time is it for you? It's always fascinating to see listeners tuning in from different places. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy. Story number 1. My name is Lucas Weiss, and if this story ever reaches anyone who can explain it logically, I welcome that explanation. I was 9 years old when it started, back in 1993. We lived in Munich, in a quiet suburb just off the Isar River. My father was an accountant, my mother a librarian, and I was their only child. I wasn't a strange kid, no imaginary friends or night terrors. I liked toy trains and building Lego cities. Life was boring in the way you want childhood to be. Until the school took us on that field trip to the old cemetery. It was part of some educational program. Architecture, history, who knows? I remember the teacher walking ahead, talking about the Bavarian stonework and the way names faded over time. That's when I saw it, half covered in ivy, a tilted grave marker, small like it belonged to a child. The letters were still clear. Lucas Weiss. Same name, same spelling, same everything. I didn't move. I just stared at it. I think someone called my name, probably the teacher, but it was like I couldn't hear properly. I remember reaching out to touch the stone and feeling the roughness of the moss. For a second, I thought I saw something move in the corner of my eye, like a flicker of motion near the base of the grave. But there was no one there. I didn't tell anyone, not at school or at home. I just remembered it every night. At first, nothing strange happened, but within a week my parents noticed something off. I was tired during the day, distracted. My grades slipped a bit. I started drawing the cemetery, specifically that grave. Dozens of times, always the same angle, the same shadows. My mom asked why, and I told her I liked the shape of the stone. That was a lie. The real reason? I was seeing it in my sleep. Every night, I would dream of walking through the cemetery. I knew the path by heart, even though we'd only been there once. I saw the names. I knew which ones were crumbling, which ones had fresh flowers, and every time I'd end up in front of his or my grave. Sometimes I stood there and just looked. Other times I'd kneel and whisper things I didn't remember when I woke up. Then things escalated. One morning, my mom asked where my socks were. Not just a pair, multiple, gone. I shrugged. Then she found one of my sketchbooks under the kitchen table, filled with more grave drawings, ones I had no memory of making. A week later, a spoon disappeared. A day after that, a candle. Always small things, always things I could carry. Then one night, I woke up and my feet were dirty, like I'd been walking barefoot outside. I told my dad and he looked at me strangely. That night he stayed up to keep watch. Around 2 a.m. he must have dozed off. By the time he realized I was already gone. He found me standing at the edge of our yard, facing the trees behind our house. I was holding something. My baby blanket, I think, and whispering. He asked what I was doing, and apparently I said, "He's not cold anymore." That was when they took me to the doctor. A sleep specialist, then a child psychologist. I was tested for seizures, night terrors, even mild schizophrenia. Everything came back normal. I was just stressed or adjusting. They prescribed melatonin and told my parents to reduce my screen time, but this was the early 90s, so we barely had cable. Eventually, my mom tried something different. She asked me to draw the cemetery again, consciously this time. I did, slowly, but as I drew, I started to remember things, like how the grave next to mine belonged to a girl named Johanna, or how someone had left a red marble by the base of a tree 2 plots down. Specific things. Too specific. That's when she asked the question that changed everything. "Lucas, have you been going there?" I swore I hadn't. I swore it, and I meant it. But she didn't believe me. She called the cemetery office the next day. The clerk was polite, helpful, and then quiet. She asked for the name again. Lucas Weiss, born 1984, died 1993, buried in Section C, Plot 44. He'd been 9, died in a house fire. No family listed except a grandfather who had since passed. No photos, no obituary. My mother cried that night, silently. I heard her in the hallway. That's when I started remembering more. Not just dreams. Memories that didn't feel like mine. Playing with a dog named Felix, hiding under a staircase, eating potato soup from a chipped green bowl. I told my parents and they panicked. My dad yelled. Not at me, just at the air, at the helplessness. My mom called the doctor again. Then came the worst night. I disappeared. It was a Friday. I'd gone to sleep like normal, but when my parents checked at 3 a.m., my bed was empty. Front door locked, back door too. No open windows. They searched the house. Then the neighborhood. Then the police came. It took them 4 hours to find me. I was curled up beside the grave. Not just mine, the other Lucas's. I was hugging something. A toy car. Melted plastic, old, dusty, like it had survived a fire. My fingerprints were on it, so were someone else's. The grave had been disturbed, just a little, as if something had been placed beside it, buried with care. My parents didn't ask questions anymore. They didn't take me to the cemetery again. My father even suggested we move, but we never did. I stopped sleepwalking after that night. For a while, things felt normal again. I got older. The drawings stopped. The dreams faded. By the time I was 12, I could almost convince myself it never happened. Until I turned 19. That's when I found the photo. It was buried in a shoebox in the attic. Old family pictures, mostly. But there, in the middle, was a black and white photo of a boy at a birthday party. 9 candles, a cake, streamers. But it wasn't me. He looked like me, sure. Same haircut, same eyes. But it wasn't me. His smile was different, softer. Behind him, written on the wall in block letters, "Happy Birthday, Lucas." I flipped it over. A date scribbled in pencil, March 4th, 1993. I was born in 1984. My birthday is in June. I took it downstairs and showed my mom. She went pale, sat down. She didn't cry this time. She just said one thing. "That's your cousin. He died in a fire. We never told you." I asked why. She said because I was too young. Because it didn't matter. Because we weren't close with that side of the family. But mostly because they didn't want me to grow up with a shadow. That night, I went back to the cemetery. I hadn't been there in a decade. I found the grave again. Someone had replaced the stone, clean marble now, fresh flowers, and a small plaque beside it. Forever loved, forever 9. I didn't sleepwalk again after that. Not once. But sometimes I wonder, what if I hadn't found that grave? What if no one had known about the other Lucas? What if something had stayed inside me? Not memories, but something colder? Now I'm 41, I'm married, I have a son, his name isn't Lucas. Last year, we visited Munich again, just for a few days. My wife wanted to see the markets. My son wanted to ride the trains. One afternoon, we walked past the cemetery. I felt a strange chill, but didn't stop. I didn't look. I just kept walking. That night, my son told me he had a dream. He said he saw a boy under a tree holding a toy car. He said the boy looked like me. He said the boy asked him for socks because his feet were always cold. I didn't sleep that night, but my son did. The next morning, I threw the photo in the river, and we never went back. Story number 2. I was born on the exact day my older sister died. Same hour, same minute. May 3rd, 1999. My parents didn't talk about her much. I knew her name, Holly, but not much else. There were a few framed photos of her in the hallway, a girl with long blonde hair, always smiling in soft sunlight, like a ghost caught in good lighting. She looked nothing like me. Maybe that was the problem. Every birthday felt strange in our house. Mom would light a candle for me, then set one next to Holly's photo too. Dad would usually leave the room. When I was a kid, I thought it was normal. As a teen, I started to resent it. Imagine turning 16, blowing out candles next to a dead sister's portrait. Kind of ruins the vibe. The doll was always part of it, though. Holly's doll. It was a porcelain thing with blue glass eyes that looked wet and alive. Her dress was sky blue, her tiny shoes hand-stitched. Mom kept her in a glass case in Holly's old room, which she called the memory room. Nobody was allowed in there unless Mom said so. Sometimes, on quiet nights, I'd pass the door and swear I could hear it creak open behind me. When I turned 17, my friends dared me to bury the doll. I didn't tell them about the backstory. I just said, "There's this creepy doll in my house. My mom's obsessed with it." The dare started as a joke. We were at my friend Riley's place talking about weird stuff we could film for his TikTok. I wasn't trying to be cruel. I just wanted to feel like I owned something in this house. Every inch of it felt like Holly's shadow. That night, while Mom was asleep, I took the key from the top drawer of her jewelry box and crept into the memory room. The air smelled like dried lavender and something older, like mildew and old paper. The doll sat on a shelf, surrounded by dusty trophies and pressed flowers. I opened the case. The hinges whined. The doll was lighter than I expected, and her dress brushed my wrist like silk. For 1 second, I hesitated. Her glass eyes looked straight through me. I shoved her into my backpack and didn't look back. We drove out to Breakers Hill just after midnight. It was cold but dry. Riley brought a small spade. We walked into the woods, laughing under our breath, filming bits for his channel. "You sure your mom's not gonna kill you?" he joked. "I'll be back before she even notices," I said. "Let's just get this over with." We picked a spot under a tree, a little off the main trail. I dug while they filmed. The dirt was soft, but it took longer than I expected. Finally, I dropped the doll in, not bothering to pose her or wrap her up, just dirt on porcelain. I covered her, patted the mound down with the back of the shovel, and stood up. "Done," I said. "Now I'm officially not the freak of the family." We laughed. It felt like nothing, just a prank, nothing more. The next morning, the doll was in my car. I didn't scream. I didn't freak out. At first I thought Riley was messing with me, that he came back, dug it up, and planted it in the back seat of my Civic. But when I asked, he swore he hadn't touched it. Even showed me his phone history. They went straight home, and the footage from his dashcam backed it up. The doll was clean, no dirt, no marks, just sitting upright, legs neatly folded, blue, dress crisp. I threw her into a duffel bag and zipped it up. I didn't sleep that night. My brain spiraled through every possibility. Mom found out, had a key tracker, had the doll replaced, but none of it made sense. When I checked the glass case the next morning, it was still unlocked, still open, empty. I left the duffel bag in the garage and went to school like nothing happened. I didn't tell my parents. They didn't notice. That night, I dreamed of a girl's voice calling my name, over and over, from behind a locked door. The second time she appeared, I hadn't touched the bag in days. I'd actually forgotten about it. until I opened my closet, and there she was, on my shelf, between my high school trophies. Same pose, same faint smile. I was done pretending it was a prank. I called Riley. He didn't want to talk about it. He said weird stuff had been happening since that night. His dog wouldn't stop barking at the garage. His mom had nightmares for 3 nights straight. I asked him if he wanted to go back and dig up the site. He just said, "You already did." "What do you mean?" He paused. "The dirt was disturbed. I saw it on my run yesterday. It looked like someone had been there. I hadn't gone back. No one had, except her. I stopped sleeping. I kept the doll locked in the trunk of my car and started driving with it everywhere. I thought maybe I could leave her somewhere far away. Another city, another coast, but every time I tried, something stopped me. Flat tires, wrong turns, sudden migraines. I couldn't leave Wellington. One night I parked at the cliffs and took her out. I wrapped her in a blanket, shoved her into a duffel, and hurled her over the edge into the crashing sea. The bag tumbled, bounced on the rocks, and vanished into the black. For the first time in weeks, I slept. The next morning, she was sitting on my desk. That broke something in me. I finally told my mom. She didn't get angry. She didn't even act surprised. She just sat there, looking at the doll like she was seeing an old friend. "I thought maybe she'd come back to you eventually," she said. She always wanted a sibling. Even when she was little, she'd say, "I want a brother, one who listens to me." I stared at her. "What are you talking about?" Mom looked down at her hands. "She died in her sleep. But not from illness. She choked on a puzzle piece. We thought she was fine. Then I went to wake her the next morning." Her voice cracked and she shook her head. "But before that, she was obsessed with that doll, talked to it like it was alive, said it would help her talk to whoever came after." I felt cold, like my insides were shrinking. "You mean me?" "I don't know," she whispered. "I used to think it was just grief talking, but you were born that night. Same room, same bed." I took the doll back to the woods that afternoon. I didn't bury her this time. I placed her at the base of the tree, whispered, "I'm sorry," and walked away. She was in my passenger seat when I turned on the engine. So I did the last thing I could think of. I visited Holly's grave. I hadn't been there in years. The headstone was small, simple. Her name, her birth and death dates. No message, no flowers, just grass and dirt. I sat there for hours, with the doll on my lap. And finally I said it. "I'm not replacing you. I'm not better than you. But I'm real. I'm alive. And I need to live my life without being haunted by yours." The wind picked up slightly. I thought I heard a laugh. Then the doll blinked. Just once. I stood, heart racing, and walked straight to the nearest rubbish bin on the cemetery path. I dropped her in, turned my back, and never looked back. That night, I slept. The next morning, I opened my closet, car, drawer. Nothing. She never came back. That was 6 years ago. I've never told anyone else, not Riley, not my dad. Mom passed away last year and I found the memory room cleared out, all Holly's things gone. All but one. A note, folded between the pages of an old book. It said, "Thank you for setting her free." And underneath it, a pressed flower. One that only grew under the tree at Breakers Hill. Story number 3. I hadn't been to Vancouver in years. Not since Emma and I were kids and our parents took us to see Stanley Park and that weird smiling orca statue by the harbor. She loved it so much she cried when we left. I remember holding her hand on the plane home, promising we'd come back someday. But when I finally returned, it wasn't for a vacation. I came to scatter her ashes. Emma died in a car crash last winter. Black ice, an unlit curve, and a transport truck that didn't see her until it was too late. She'd been living in Calgary, but she'd left specific instructions in her will. If anything ever happened to her, she wanted her ashes released on a hilltop in North Vancouver, where our grandparents used to take us for walks. It wasn't a registered gravesite, just a quiet ridge overlooking the city, where the moss clung to stone and the air always smelled like pine. She said it made her feel safe. I waited until May to come. I wanted the snow to be gone, the grass soft again, the trees green the way she remembered them. The urn felt heavier than it should have. Maybe that's just what grief does. It adds weight to everything. I took a cab to the foot of the trail, same one we used to walk with Grandpa. The forest looked just the same, quiet, sleepy, tall. But what caught my eye was something new, a small, modern cemetery built along the ridge. Neatly kept, fresh plots. And for some reason, I couldn't help myself. I wandered in. There weren't many gravestones, maybe 20, tops, all arranged in tight rows with polished black granite and silver engraving. It was peaceful, eerily so. I was about to turn back when I saw it. My legs froze mid-step. I thought my eyes were lying. Emma Grace Halden, 2019. Beloved sister, kind soul, gentle light. That was impossible. The ashes were in my backpack. I had the urn, the death certificate, the funeral bill, so how the hell was her name already carved in stone? Bent down to inspect it, thinking maybe it was someone with the same name, but there was even a quote etched beneath. She used to sing under the pine trees. That was something only I knew, something I had told the funeral director when they asked what to write on her obituary. No flowers? No signs of visitors, just a stone with Emma's full name and the right dates. I stepped back, heart pounding in my ears. I wasn't hallucinating. I wasn't crazy. This was real. I pulled out my phone, snapped a picture, then another. Then I double-checked the death certificate again, shaking. It matched. Everything matched. I didn't scatter her ashes that day. I took the urn back to my hotel and sat there for hours, trying to rationalize it. Maybe someone had bought a plot in advance? No, they don't engrave the dates unless you're dead. Maybe a mistake? A prank? Who would do that? And how would they know the quote? The next morning, I called the cemetery office. The man on the line was polite. His name was Ron. Hi, I'm calling about a gravestone at your new hillside site. It has my sister's name on it, Emma Grace Halden, but that shouldn't be there. I have her ashes with me. Ron went silent. I heard him typing. I imagined him pulling up the records. Miss Halden, did you say you have your sister's ashes? Yes, right here. She was cremated in Calgary. I have the paperwork. More typing. He sighed. Ma'am, we do have a record for an Emma Halden. It was entered in January of this year. But there's no burial listed, no body. Just a paid order for a stone and inscription. It says, placed by special request. Client requested no contact or follow-up. Client? What client? I'm afraid I can't tell you that. It was a sealed request, paid in full. We assumed it was a symbolic memorial. Some families do that when cremation is involved. But that quote, the one about the pine trees, how would anyone else know that? He didn't have an answer. I hung up and stared at my phone for a long time. The quote had only ever been said aloud once, at the funeral parlor when the director asked me for a memory. I hadn't written it down. I hadn't posted it online. The only people who'd heard it were me, the director, and the assistant who'd printed the obituary. I called the funeral home next. The assistant, Greg, remembered me, remembered Emma. He confirmed what I already knew, that no one else had asked about the quote. I typed it myself, he said, "from what you told me. I didn't share it with anyone, didn't even email it, just printed." The tension in my spine twisted into something cold. Someone had to be copying me, watching me, tracking something. But why? That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept the urn on the table across the room, as if it could answer me. Around 2 a.m., my phone buzzed. "Unknown number. Did you like the stone?" I stared at the message, my mouth went dry. I didn't respond. I took a screenshot and blocked the number, but another message came from a different one 10 minutes later. "Scatter them there, that's where she belongs." I froze. My hotel door was locked. The windows were shut. I checked the hallway. Empty. No sign of anyone. I called the front desk, asked if anyone had requested my room or used my name. Nothing. The next day, I went back to the cemetery. This time, I wasn't alone. I brought a friend from college, James, who lived nearby. I needed someone to witness what I was seeing. The stone was still there, unchanged. James saw it too. "That's messed up," he said. "You should call the police." But what would I even tell them? That someone bought a gravestone with my dead sister's info and quoted me without ever contacting me? It sounded like a sick prank, not a crime. Still, James and I checked the cemetery perimeter. That's when we noticed the small trail camera mounted on a tree just past the fence. It wasn't hidden well. Black strap, flashing red light. Someone had been recording. James climbed up and took it down. Back at his place, we reviewed the footage on his laptop. It had a memory card. Hundreds of short clips, mostly of animals, walkers, people visiting graves. Then one clip caught our attention. It was from a week before I arrived in Vancouver. A person in a black coat, face covered, came into frame with what looked like a folded stone plaque. They placed it carefully into the ground, then knelt beside it and just sat there for 15 minutes, unmoving, watching. Then, just before they left, they placed something at the foot of the stone. The clip was too blurry to make out what it was. We went back again, this time in daylight. No offerings remained, but I noticed the soil was disturbed. I brushed aside some moss and found a small silver pendant buried halfway in the dirt. Emma's pendant. She never took it off. It was shaped like a crescent moon, scratched from years of wear. I'd asked for it after the cremation, but they said it hadn't been found, that maybe it burned. But it hadn't. Someone had taken it. My stomach twisted. Someone had been with her body before or after the cremation, someone who had access to her remains, someone who'd planted this whole thing. I called the crematorium, demanded answers. The director told me he'd review the logs. A few hours later, he called back. "There's something odd," he said. "According to our system, the cremation took place on December 17th. But our oven logs don't match that date. No activity was recorded. And the tag for your sister's remains, it's missing from our archive." What does that mean? It means we may not have cremated her, or someone swapped the ashes before pickup. I couldn't breathe. So what did I bring with me? "I don't know," he said quietly, "but it might not be her." James and I returned to the cemetery one last time. I didn't bring the urn. I brought the pendant. I left it there, buried at the base of the stone again. I whispered a goodbye. If it was her, somehow, in some way, I hoped she'd know. I hoped she'd rest. I didn't get another text after that. No more messages, no strange calls. I flew home the next day, emptied the urn into a river, near our childhood home. Whether it was really her or not, I let go. Weeks passed. I tried to move on, tried to forget the stone, the texts, the possibility that Emma's body had been stolen or swapped or watched. The police never followed up. They said no crime could be proven. Then last week, I got a letter. No return address, just my name. Inside was a photo of Emma. She looked older, maybe a year or two, but it was her. Same smile, same eyes. The photo looked candid, like she was at a bus stop, caught mid-laugh. On the back, in black pen, "You let her go. That was the right thing to do." And for the first time in months, I didn't feel afraid. I felt peace, not because I had answers, but because wherever she was, alive, gone, or something in between, she wasn't suffering. Someone had watched over her, for reasons I'll never understand. Someone had tried to guide me, and maybe the stone wasn't a trick. Maybe it was the only way they knew how to say goodbye. So I said it too, and I meant it. Story number 4. It was a cloudy Sunday in early November when I went to visit my mother's grave. It wasn't a special anniversary or anything like that, just one of those days where the weight of silence presses too hard on your chest, and all you want is to hear your mom's voice again. I hadn't planned it. I just found myself driving to Southridge Cemetery with a bundle of carnations in the passenger seat, and my engagement ring twisting nervously on my finger. That ring, it still felt foreign. Michael had proposed just 3 weeks earlier, and while I loved him, genuinely, I hadn't yet grown into the role of a fiancé. The diamond was perfect, just like everyone said, but it felt heavy, not just physically, emotionally, as if the ring had expectations I wasn't sure I could meet. Mom would have known what to say. She always knew how to ground me without judgment. I parked under the giant oak tree that split the cemetery in two, grabbed the flowers, and walked the familiar path to her spot. Row F, Lot 18. Her headstone was modest but elegant. Sarah Lynn Baker, loving mother, tireless soul. She'd died of breast cancer 5 years earlier, and not a single week had gone by without me thinking of her. I often talked to her out loud when I was there. It made the ache feel manageable. That day, I crouched near the headstone, brushed away some leaves, and replaced the faded bouquet from last time with the fresh carnations. The grass was still soft from the recent rain. I sat there for longer than usual, mostly silent, just sitting, thinking. My thumb rubbed over the ring again and again, and then I stood up and started to walk away. I didn't even notice the ring was gone. It wasn't until I got home, after a long hot shower and slipping into my pajamas, that I realized it. My hand brushed against my ring finger absent-mindedly, and my stomach sank. I froze in place and checked the floor, my pockets, the car. Nothing. The ring was gone. I panicked. Michael was in Florida that weekend visiting his sister, so I didn't have to explain it right away, but I knew he'd ask when he got back. I retraced my steps, called the grocery store, the gas station, even my office, just in case. But nothing. Then it hit me. I'd been fidgeting with the ring while sitting by Mom's grave. The next morning, I drove straight back to the cemetery. It had rained again overnight, and the earth near her grave was even softer. I got down on my knees, dug with my bare hands, then went to the car to grab a plastic spoon to dig deeper. I looked like a madwoman. Grass was torn up, soil everywhere, my fingernails packed with mud. The groundskeeper, a man named Lester, who I'd seen once or twice, eventually came over. He didn't seem angry, just confused. "Lose something, miss?" "My engagement ring. I think I dropped it here yesterday." He nodded slowly and offered to help, but after a solid 20 minutes of careful digging, neither of us found a thing. He even used a small metal detector from his shed. Nothing. I thanked him and went home, defeated. I told Michael a few days later. He wasn't angry, but I could see the disappointment cross his face before he caught himself. "Don't worry," he said gently. "We'll get another one if we have to." But I didn't want another one. That one had been picked by him. It had history now, meaning, and the idea that I'd lost it at my mother's grave, it felt wrong, like I'd broken something sacred. Weeks passed. I stopped visiting the cemetery, not because I was angry at Mom, just ashamed. I couldn't face the place where I'd been so careless. Then, 2 days after Thanksgiving, I got a call from an unknown number. "Is this Miss Julia Baker?" a man asked. "Yes." "This is Lester from Southridge Cemetery." My heart stopped. "I found your ring," he said. "Well, kind of." He explained that while digging trenches to reroute a drainage line near my mother's lot, they'd unearthed something shiny. When he brushed off the dirt, it was my ring. But here's the thing. It wasn't where I'd been sitting. It was nearly a foot deeper in the soil, under the turf, as if it had been buried intentionally. I drove there the same day, hardly stopping at red lights. When I arrived, Lester handed it to me carefully. The diamond was intact. No scratches, no dirt. The gold band was warm, almost unnaturally so, like it had just come out of someone's palm. "It was here," he said, pointing to a spot just a few feet from my mother's headstone. But this part of the ground hadn't been disturbed in years. We had to cut through thick roots. There's no way it just slipped in there. I even checked the old service records. Nothing's been dug up in this section since your mother was buried. He looked at me then, nervous. I probably sound crazy, but it was placed there almost gently. I didn't know what to say. I thanked him again, slipped the ring into my coat pocket, and walked over to Mom's grave. The grass I had torn weeks ago had healed perfectly. It was like nothing had ever happened. I stood there for a long time, holding the ring in my palm. Something in me shifted. Not fear, not superstition, just awe. As if I'd been heard. A message, maybe. Not from the grave, but from memory. From the bond only a mother and daughter share. I slipped the ring back on my finger, and for the first time, it felt right, like it belonged. The next few days were uneventful. Life returned to its normal pace. Michael came home and I told him everything. He listened, eyes wide, then held my hand and said, "Maybe your mom just wanted to bless it first." We laughed, but the thought lingered. A week later, I had a dream. I hadn't dreamed of Mom in years, but this one was vivid. She was sitting at the kitchen table, peeling apples like she used to. She didn't say anything, just looked up at me with that knowing smile, the one she always gave me when I'd finally figured something out on my own. I woke up crying. In the weeks that followed, I returned to the cemetery a few more times. Each visit felt different. Later, I stopped mourning and started talking again, catching her up on wedding plans, work, the usual. I even brought Michael with me once. He said it felt peaceful. We both left flowers that day. Nothing strange happened after that. No more buried surprises, no eerie dreams. Just a quiet, steady sense of peace, the kind you don't recognize until you've gone without it for too long. Eventually, Michael and I got married in a small ceremony at the Botanical Gardens just a few blocks from the cemetery. I wore the same ring. Still do. People love to ask about how we got engaged, and I always share the proposal story, but I never mention the part about losing the ring, or where it was found, or how it felt like it had been placed there by someone who once held my hand when I was scared of the dark. Because honestly, it's not a ghost story, it's a love story, one that didn't end when the headstone went up. Some people carry their grief like a weight. Others carry it like a whisper, always there, always quiet. I think my mother wanted to remind me that she was still with me, not haunting me, just holding space. And now, when I twist the ring on my finger out of habit, it no longer feels heavy, it feels held by her. Story number 5. I never liked running indoors. The treadmill made me feel caged, like I was chasing something I'd never reach. That's why, even in Oslo's chillier months, I'd throw on a hoodie and jog through the neighborhood. The city has a strange stillness in early spring, like it's holding its breath between winter's last frost and the first real thaw. It was during one of these gray, silent mornings, April 17, 2010, that I decided to take a different route. The cemetery was older than most buildings nearby. Grunland Gravland, tucked behind rows of dull apartment blocks, with rusted black gates and uneven cobblestones, looked like it had been forgotten. But it was open, and my usual path was blocked due to construction, so I slipped through its iron entrance, earbuds in, focused on my pace. I wasn't scared. I've always found cemeteries oddly peaceful. Maybe it's the symmetry, maybe the finality. It wasn't until my second lap around the outer path, yes, I looped back out of pure routine, that I saw it. At first it was the scent that stopped me. Fresh concrete. That sharp, chalky odor. It didn't belong. Then my eyes landed on it. A grave, still damp from pouring, with a stone not yet set in place but already marked. And there was my name. Ingrid Solheim. I blinked. Stopped my music. Stepped closer. Born, 7 March 1989. Died, 22 April 2010. My birthday, my full name, and a death date, just 5 days away. I stood there, breathing too hard. For a second I thought maybe it was a prank. But who would do that? And why here? I looked around. The cemetery was empty. Even the birds had gone quiet. The wet cement around the headstone had odd symbols traced in it. Not quite letters. At first glance, I thought it was vandalism, kids drawing squiggles. But the lines were too neat, too symmetrical, like someone had carefully carved them with a tool. I backed away, jogged the rest of the way home. That evening, I told my roommate, Kaya. She laughed at first, said it sounded like something from a horror film. But when I described the grave in more detail, her face changed. She grabbed her laptop and began typing. "There's no record of a grave being dug recently in Grönland Gravland," she said. "It's a registered site. Every burial, even if planned, would be on file. That name, your name, nothing scheduled." "I saw it," I whispered. It was there. The cement was still soft. She closed her laptop. Maybe it was some sort of memorial setup? You know how people make tribute stones for loved ones who weren't buried in the same place? "No," I said. "It wasn't like that. It looked permanent. And the date, it was this week." She didn't argue, but I saw the doubt in her eyes. I didn't sleep well that night. Every noise outside felt like it was meant for me. By morning, I was exhausted and jumpy. I called in sick to work, something I never do, and decided I had to go back. I had to check if the grave was still there. Maybe it really was just some freak coincidence. I waited until just after noon. The sun peeked through the clouds as I stepped back through the gates. The cemetery was still. I walked with intention now, cutting straight toward where I'd seen it. My breath caught. The grave was gone. Or rather, there was a space. An empty patch of dirt. No cement, no name, just grass where the headstone had been. And not fresh grass, either. It looked like the ground hadn't been disturbed in years. I stood there, dizzy. My fingers shook as I pulled out my phone and snapped a photo of the spot, even though there was nothing to prove. As I turned to leave, I saw an old man sitting on a bench near the far edge of the cemetery. He was hunched, feeding crumbs to pigeons. Something about his stillness made me pause. He didn't look at me, didn't flinch. But when I passed near, he spoke without lifting his head. "Did you see your own name?" I froze. "What did you say?" "You shouldn't have gone that way," he said, still not looking up. "The stones are old, but sometimes they change. They show what's coming. Not always right, but close enough to make you think." I stepped closer. "How do you know about the stone?" He finally looked at me. His eyes were pale blue, nearly white. "My sister saw hers. Back in '75. Just like you, same spot. She laughed it off. Died a week later in a boating accident. Never went near water before that day." I didn't say anything. I just turned and walked away, faster this time. I wanted to forget this. Tell myself it was a mistake, a hallucination, maybe a stress-induced glitch in my brain. But April 22 was approaching. Over the next few days, I avoided anything remotely risky. No jogging, no public transport, no meat from dodgy shops. I even backed out of a Tinder date that seemed too perfect. Every moment felt fragile, like I was walking a tightrope where any wrong move would tip me into that predicted end. By the 21st, I was paranoid. I checked the locks 3 times that night, called my mom just to hear her voice. She said I sounded strange. I told her I was just tired. When I woke up the next morning, I didn't feel scared anymore. I felt resigned. I made coffee, sat by the window, and watched people pass. Life continued, completely unaware that a random jogger had found her own grave just a few days earlier. Around noon, a delivery van pulled up outside. I hadn't ordered anything, so I watched from behind the curtain. A man in uniform got out, scanned a package, and rang the doorbell. Kaya wasn't home, so I answered it. "Ingrid Solheim?" he asked, smiling. My stomach dropped. "Yes." He handed me a box and scanned something on his device. "Sign here, please." I didn't want to, but I did. My hands trembled as I took the package inside. It had no return label, just my name. Inside was a single object wrapped in tissue paper. A shoe. My running shoe. The one I lost months ago. It had dried dirt on it. The laces were tied in a perfect bow, though I remember leaving them undone. I dropped it like it burned me. Suddenly the old man's voice came back to me. Not always right, but close enough to make you think. This wasn't a message from death. It was a warning. A nudge. I didn't jog that day. I didn't even leave the apartment. But late that evening, Kaja came home and saw the shoe on the kitchen counter. Her face went pale. "I saw this in a police report," she said, pulling out her phone. "Last year, a girl went missing, same age as you. Look." She found the article. The girl's name was Elise Berg. Same height, same hair, even similar facial features. And she vanished while jogging near Grunland Gravel. I contacted the police the next day, gave them the shoe. They were puzzled but took it seriously. Turned out the tread matched Elise's missing pair. They reopened the case. A week later, cadaver dogs found her body behind a stone in the far west corner of the cemetery, where no one had thought to search before. She had been buried shallow, like someone wanted her to be found eventually. The grave had symbols scratched into the earth around it, same ones I'd seen in the cement. They questioned me extensively. I told them everything. I wasn't a suspect. If anything, they called me lucky. Some even whispered that maybe Elise saved me, that maybe seeing my name was a second chance, not a death sentence. I visited her grave when it was finally placed properly. I left a bouquet of lilacs, not knowing if that was her favorite. No one deserves to die afraid and be forgotten. The old man wasn't at his bench anymore. I never saw him again. When I asked around, no one could recall him. The cemetery had no records of volunteers or regulars matching his description. Sometimes, when I walk past Gronland Gravlund now, I still glance through the gates. I never go in, not because I'm scared, but because I know the stones change. They watch. They remember. I kept jogging after that, different routes, different parks, never alone. I also stopped ignoring my gut, because I believe now, completely, that fate sometimes warns us. It doesn't shout, it whispers, shows us glimpses, hints. A wet grave, a misplaced shoe, a stranger who knows your name. You can ignore it, but I didn't. And that's why I'm still here. Story number 6. I never expected to touch a shovel again after my father passed. My grandfather had died 20 years before that, buried in Zentralfriedhof, the massive cemetery outside Vienna that held more history than most museums. He had always said he wanted to be near Strauss and Brahms, as if sharing a patch of earth with them made any difference after death. We honored that wish, paid for a modest but proper plot, and moved on, or so we thought. Last year, a legal notice arrived. The city was rezoning several grave areas to accommodate newer plots, and families were being given options: either pay a fee to renew the plot's lease or relocate the remains elsewhere. It was a formality, cold, bureaucratic, but I understood. Cemeteries weren't endless. Land was expensive. I spoke with my mother. She didn't have the heart to go through with anything, so it fell to me. I was the last living relative who still lived in Vienna. She gave me the blessing to move him to the family grave in Linz, beside my grandmother. We figured it was poetic in a way. They were separated in death longer than in life. The process wasn't immediate. I had to request exhumation permits, cemetery coordination, even hire a private mortuary team to handle the transfer. Weeks passed. Then a date was set. April 17th, 1982. I arrived early that morning, gray coffee in hand, dressed in black out of habit more than necessity. The workers were already there, 2 from the cemetery authority, 1 from the mortuary company. They were respectful, quiet, efficient. I stood a few feet away, near the iron fence, as they broke the soil. No family came, just me. The cold breeze carried the scent of earth and faint flowers. It was oddly peaceful. They reached the coffin in about 45 minutes. One of the cemetery men wiped his brow and signaled. I walked closer, expecting to glance at the wooden lid, maybe nod and let them finish the job. But something wasn't right. One of the men turned to me and muttered something in German I didn't fully catch. I leaned in. He looked pale. "There are 2 coffins," he said quietly. I laughed, thinking he was making a grim joke. "What?" He pointed into the pit. Sure enough, beneath the first layer of soil, there wasn't just one wooden box, there were 2. One sat slightly above the other, like someone had wedged it in later. Both looked old, weathered by time. The top one had a brass nameplate. The bottom one was darker, unmarked. I froze. That's not possible. We buried him in 62. This grave's only supposed to hold 1. The workers exchanged nervous glances. One asked if I wanted both removed. I hesitated, torn between confusion and the gnawing feeling that something was horribly wrong. "Take out the top one first," I said. They did, carefully. The wood groaned as they lifted it from the earth. The brass plate read, "Josef Neumann, 1901-1962. That was my grandfather. I felt a slight relief. At least that part was right. Then they uncovered the second coffin. It was smaller. Not child-sized, but definitely shorter than a full-grown adult. No markings, no handles, just a plain, matte black finish, scratched in places like it had been shoved around. One of the workers shook his head. "This isn't city registered," he said. "There's no record of a second burial in this plot." "Open it," I said before I even knew why. He hesitated. "We're not allowed without police presence if it's not a legal interment." "Call them, then," I said. My voice was sharper than I intended. We waited an hour. An officer arrived, older guy with a mustache and kind eyes. He asked me the same questions I had no answers to. Then, with my signed consent, they pried open the lid. Inside was a body. Mummified from time, the skin stretched and dry like old parchment. The remains were curled, knees pulled to chest, arms crossed tightly. The clothes were ragged but not buried, with respect rag, more like dumped in haste rag. Torn skirt, blouse buttons missing. Female. The officer frowned deeply. She wasn't supposed to be here. I asked if it could have been a mistake, an old grave that was never properly recorded. He shook his head. "No. Each plot has strict registry. There's no file for a second burial." I stared at her face, what remained of it. Lips thin, hollow eyes sunken but somehow still expressive in their silence. I felt sick. The cemetery workers cordoned off the area, and the police took over. My grandfather's remains were temporarily held at the funeral home. The second coffin was transported to the city morgue for investigation. I went home that night numb, exhausted, confused. Who the hell had we buried my grandfather with? The investigation took weeks. They ran what little they could from the body. The forensics department said she'd likely died in the 1950s or early 60s. No cause of death could be determined, but there were signs of blunt force trauma to the side of her skull. Defensive wounds on her hands. It didn't take a detective to put it together. She didn't go into that box peacefully. They also pulled fibers from inside the coffin, bits of carpet, tape residue. She'd been transported in something else before being stuffed in the box. Then came the worst part. The forensics examiner called me in, not for answers, for identification. I stared at a reconstructed photo, digitally touched up, based on skull scans and tissue estimates. The face was distorted, but vaguely familiar. "Do you recognize her?" the examiner asked. I nodded slowly. Years ago, when I was 9 or 10, I remembered an old woman who lived above my grandfather's flat in Leopoldstadt. Frau Menzel. She wore a red scarf every day. Kind, always gave me licorice. Then one day she vanished. No funeral, no gossip, just gone. I asked my grandfather once where she went. He said she moved away, someplace warmer. I didn't question it. Now I was staring into a version of that face, aged and decayed, and suddenly the memory clicked like a rusted lock turning. I told the examiner what I knew. They ran records, confirmed it. Clara Menzel, reported missing in 1961, never found. No known family. The case went cold. The officer leading the investigation met with me privately afterward. He didn't speak officially, just man to man. "We believe your grandfather might have been involved," he said carefully. "There's no way to prove it now, but the timing, the location, it adds up." I sat there, trying to reconcile the man who taught me chess and built wooden toys with the possibility that he had murdered a woman and buried her beneath his own coffin. Who even does that? But then it started making more sense. His paranoia late in life, the sudden move to a different district, the way he burned all his old letters before dying. We'll never know what happened exactly. No confessions, no witnesses. Just one man dead, one woman buried beneath him, and a very old secret finally exposed by accident. I had my grandfather reburied beside my grandmother anyway. Some argued he didn't deserve it. But I wasn't burying the man I thought he might have been. I was burying the man I remembered. Flawed, quiet, unreadable. Maybe that was the problem all along. The city quietly reclassified Clara's death as a homicide. There was no media coverage. Just a brief internal memo. No family to inform. No headlines. Just a life lost and found again. Too late to matter. But I visit her grave now. The city gave her a proper one. Simple stone, her name etched neatly. Clara Menzel. 192019661. Found, not forgotten. Sometimes I sit beside her plot longer than I sit by my grandfather's. I think about how many other graves in this world hold more than one story. How many secrets go with us into the ground. I never opened another grave. I never will. But I still dream of that second coffin. And in those dreams, it's not empty. Story number 7. I work maintenance at Campo Verano Cemetery in Rome. Not glamorous, but it pays decent and the quiet isn't something I mind. Most people think it's creepy, being around graves all day. But for me, the dead are easier to deal with than the living. They don't talk back. They don't lie. They don't come looking for things. Until one day someone did. It was a Tuesday morning in April 2002. The grounds were still damp from the rain over the weekend, and we were prepping a fresh plot for a family burial scheduled later in the week. This one was a single coffin grave, nothing special. I was assigned to clean up the area, make sure the soil was level, and remove any debris. Just as I started digging near one of the corners to loosen some roots, my shovel struck something hard. But it didn't sound like rock or metal. It was a dull, plasticky thud. I dropped to my knees and brushed away the soil with my hands. About a foot under the surface, I found a leather wallet. New looking, no rot, no mold, not even wet. It didn't make sense. That area had been untouched for months, and even if someone dropped it, it shouldn't have looked that fresh buried under all that dirt. I opened it, curiosity more than anything, and found a driver's license, a couple of bank cards, and about 70 euros in cash. The ID was Italian, issued just a few months prior. Name, Lorenzo Bettini, born 1972. Address listed in trust. No photo damage, no fading. It felt wrong. The cemetery isn't somewhere you expect to find anything lost, let alone buried. I handed it over to my supervisor, Claudio, who agreed it was strange, but said he'd take it to the office and log it in the lost and found ledger. We figured maybe some visitor dropped it and a kid or animal buried it. Strange, but not impossible. The next day, someone showed up at the gate asking for it. He said his name was Lorenzo Bettini. Same name, same face. I remembered the photo in the ID, his jawline, the sharp crease under his eye. He even had the same navy moolie jacket that matched the one in the ID photo. He wasn't angry or panicked. Calm, polite. Just said he heard from someone in the cemetery staff that his wallet was found. We hadn't told anyone, I knew that. Only Claudio and I had seen it. And we hadn't called anyone. No number was inside the wallet, and we don't call strangers over lost property. Claudio came out to confirm. The man calmly verified every item inside, card numbers, the way a corner of one bill had a tear, even the receipt from a gas station in Testaccio. It all matched. He signed the ledger, thanked us, and left with it like it was nothing. I tried to brush it off. Maybe he'd come by the office the day before I got back from the plot. Maybe someone else told him. I didn't ask too many questions. But it kept nagging at me, how fresh it was, how it was buried, and how no one had any explanation for why it was under the dirt. A week later, things got stranger. I got a call at the cemetery's main line, a woman asking about the burial schedule for her uncle. When I checked the name she gave, Giancarlo Bettini, it didn't raise any red flags until she casually mentioned that his nephew Lorenzo had passed away recently too. She was wondering if she could place a shared plaque. I froze. I asked her to repeat the name. Lorenzo Bettini. She confirmed. Said he died in January, car accident outside of Naples. Buried in Trastevere. I thanked her and hung up, barely able to think. How was that possible? I had spoken to Lorenzo Bettini just days ago. He was alive, breathing, clear-eyed, calm. There was no confusion, no impersonation. I remembered his handshake. Firm, solid. I checked the burial database. Sure enough, a Lorenzo Bettini was listed. Died January 19, 2002. Buried January 24 in a private cemetery near Trastevere. I called the number listed for the cemetery and asked, under the pretense of a maintenance transfer, if they had a record. The man on the line confirmed. Yes, Lorenzo was buried there. Yes, family had visited last month. And that's when the anger kicked in. Not fear, anger. Whoever this man was, he had used a dead man's name and documents to claim that wallet. That meant he wasn't just some guy. It meant fraud, identity theft. And somehow it had all started in our graveyard, with that wallet buried in dirt where no one should have had access. I went to the police. They didn't exactly rush to believe me. I was just a groundskeeper, claiming some guy pretended to be a dead man to reclaim his own ID. I get it. Sounds like something out of a thriller. But I filed the report. Gave them the wallet copy, the name, the time of visit, even the ledger entry with his signature. They promised to look into it. Weeks passed. I didn't hear back. Then, in early June, 2 plainclothes officers showed up. They asked me to come with them for identification. I was taken to a precinct in Trastevere and shown a security camera image. It was him, the man who came for the wallet. The photo was from a pharmacy robbery 2 weeks earlier. Same jacket, same height, same cold composure. The clerk had handed over nearly 400 euros before he vanished into the alleyways. No fingerprints left, no vehicle traced. But the photo was clear. He wasn't just a fraud. He was escalating. Then came the kicker. The fingerprints left on the wallet, the ones taken by the station after he signed the log, they weren't in any national database. But they did match a case file from 1984, a man named Paolo Grassi. Same build, same eyes, but born in 1946, died in prison in 1993. That broke everything. According to records, Paolo Grassi had no living relatives. He'd served 18 years for bank fraud and forgery, died of a stroke in Civitavecchia prison. Closed case. But somehow, here were his prints, alive again in 2002, on a man pretending to be a dead Lorenzo Bettini. I asked the officers the only question I could think of, so who is he? They didn't answer directly. One of them just said, "We're not sure this man is someone. Maybe he's a lot of people." After that, I kept my distance. I went back to work, focused on trimming hedges, fixing gates, and laying flowers where they belonged. But something had shifted. I found myself watching the corners more carefully, listening harder when footsteps approached. 2 months later, Claudio retired early. He never said why. As for me, I stayed, but I started keeping a journal. Every strange visitor, every time a grave seemed disturbed for no reason. I built a file, of sorts. Nothing that would hold in court, but enough for me. And about a year later, I got a letter. No return address, no postage mark, just a folded sheet of paper left in my locker at work. Inside it said, "You did well to tell the truth, but some identities were meant to stay buried." Underneath was a photocopy of the same driver's license, only this time the name had been changed. Same photo, different name. Gabriele Ferri, born 1961, no address. There was no one to report it to. The police had closed the Bettini case, listing the imposter as identity unknown, and moved on. No more sightings, no more leads. But I've never stopped thinking about that man. Calm, focused, precise, like he'd done it 100 times before. And maybe he had. Because here's the last thing I found out. In the city records, the name Paolo Grassi had a note in the margin. Alias, suspected in multiple identity fraud cases prior to arrest. The list had 5 names. The last one, Gabriele Ferri, the same name on the fake ID I was sent. He wasn't a ghost. He wasn't a monster. He was a man who knew how to disappear and how to rise again, using someone else's life. That's the scariest part. Not that he tricked me, not that he walked into the cemetery and took what he wanted, but that he might be out there now, working under another name, shaking another hand, wearing another smile. And maybe, just maybe, he's buried another wallet somewhere else, waiting to rise again. I don't scare easy, but sometimes, when I dig too deep, I still wonder, am I the one unearthing the dead, or just helping them come back? Story number 8. I drive for a courier company in Zurich that handles late-night tech deliveries. Usually laptops, secure flash drives, software parts, stuff that banks or data centers need urgently. Most of the time, I enjoy the peace of the night. No traffic, no people, just me, the engine hum, and the occasional coffee pit stop. It pays well, and it lets me be alone. That night, I had a delivery scheduled for a tech firm just past the outskirts. An odd hour for a drop-off, 2:35 a.m., but not unusual for this kind of work. My GPS, a reliable app I used every night, guided me through familiar roads until it suggested a detour. I paused for a second. Shortest route, 11 minutes faster. Normally, I wouldn't care, but I had another delivery after this, and a shorter route meant more time for a break. So I turned right. The road narrowed quickly, with cobbled patches in between modern asphalt. It felt like something out of the older parts of Zurich. Beautiful during the day, unnerving at night. I passed a crumbling stone wall covered in ivy. It wasn't until I saw the iron gate halfway open that I realized what I'd driven into. The cemetery. The GPS still showed the route cutting straight through, as if it were just any park or through road. I slowed down. The gate creaked as I nudged it fully open and rolled inside. I figured it was probably some service path or a public shortcut that cuts across to the other road. I kept driving slowly, headlights on low. Gravel crunched under my tires and pale stone markers lined either side of the narrow path. A few angel statues stood among the graves, their faces shadowed by the glow of my lights. The place was clearly old. Swiss cemeteries are well kept, but this one looked forgotten. The deeper I drove, the worse the reception got. I tapped my phone again. No service, not even Wi-Fi. And the GPS? Frozen. I tapped it a few times, then restarted the phone. Nothing. That's when I heard the gates behind me groan. I looked in the mirror. The wind, or maybe gravity, had swung them shut. I tried not to overthink it, just an old gate. I told myself I'd make the delivery and backtrack if I had to. Except I never saw an exit. The path wound between tall hedges and rows of ancient graves. I saw no side lanes, no other gates. My headlights flickered for a second, and my heart skipped. I immediately stopped the van and turned the engine off, trying to reset everything. Complete silence. Even the trees around the cemetery seemed still. No birds, no night breeze, just... I stepped out of the van. Gravel crunched under my boots, louder than I expected. I walked ahead with the flashlight from my glove box, expecting to find another gate or an opening in the fence line. I went about 100 meters in and found... nothing. Just more tombstones, some of them broken. One had a date on it, 186-111913. My light hit something carved into the base of it. German text that read, Die zuvor gingen wachen über die bleiben. Those who left too soon watch over those who remain. It wasn't until I turned around that I noticed how far I'd come from the van. But when I walked back, something was wrong. The van was gone. I stared at the gravel path, completely empty. No tire tracks, no lights, no sound. I ran forward thinking maybe I was turned around, maybe I'd taken a wrong branch in the path. But I hadn't. I knew I hadn't. I had left the van right there. But now it was gone. Vanished. Like it had never existed. Panic started to crawl in. My phone still showed no signal. The flashlight in my hand flickered once. I slapped it. It held. I retraced my steps, but now everything looked different. The path curved where it hadn't before. There were new graves that hadn't been there minutes earlier. One had a candle lit beside it. I hadn't lit it. I hadn't seen anyone else in the cemetery. And that's when I heard the breathing. Not mine. Not close. But steady, rhythmic breathing from somewhere in the hedges to my left. Deep and slow. Like someone sleeping. Or watching. I froze, trying not to make a sound. I waited, listening. It stopped. And then a soft sound. Footsteps behind me. 1, 2, 3. I spun around. Nothing. The grave stood quietly, untouched. The air felt heavier now. I wasn't about to stand there waiting to be toyed with. I started walking back toward the original gate, at least the direction I thought it was. I walked fast, ignoring the sound of twigs cracking or the brief shadows that crossed between headstones. I just focused on my steps. I walked until my legs ached, until my breath came out sharp. Still no gate. But then I saw light. A dim, flickering yellow light from behind a stone wall. I followed it, pushing through overgrown branches until I reached what looked like a small chapel or caretaker's shack. A single lantern burned outside the door. A sign above it read, Verwalterbureau, caretaker office. I knocked. No answer. I tried the door. It creaked open. Inside, everything was covered in dust. Papers lay scattered. A coat hung from a wall hook. A calendar still marked January 2005. There was a landline phone on the desk. I grabbed it. No dial tone. I scanned the room for a map, anything, and I found one, tacked to the corkboard on the wall, a full layout of the cemetery. The entrance gate. Service paths. A rear exit, marked with a red X. I memorized it fast. As I turned to leave, I noticed a set of Polaroid photos clipped above the desk. Each one showed a car, parked, in the cemetery, each with a person beside it. Blurry, almost like they were caught mid-measure, some looking confused, some looking terrified. One of the last photos, third from the right, was my van, and me, standing beside it, wearing the exact clothes I had on. That made me stumble backward. The photo looked faded, like it had been there for years. I didn't take it, no one else had. I ran. No pretending anymore. I wanted out. I followed the map's path through tight rows of graves, climbing over a fallen statue, until I saw it, the rear gate, rusted shut, but with enough space between the bars for me to slip through. I squeezed my way out, scraping my arm, falling hard on the grass outside, and suddenly, just like flipping a switch, my phone buzzed in my pocket. The service returned. 4 bars, LTE, GPS kicked in. I checked the map. I was nowhere near where the original path should have led. The cemetery entrance was 2 kilometers behind me. But my van? I never saw it again. I called dispatch, lied, said the vehicle was stolen, filed a report, quit the next morning. The company was angry, but I didn't care. I switched to a warehouse job a week later. No more driving, no more deliveries. Months passed. Sometimes I still check the cemetery online, but it doesn't show up on any map apps. Google Maps shows that land as empty, marked non-public property. But a few weeks ago I got a letter. No return address. Inside was a Polaroid. It showed me again, standing beside a white van. Only this time, I was smiling, and I don't remember ever smiling that night. I don't know who took that picture, or how they knew where to send it, but I haven't driven a car since. And I never, ever use shortcuts. Story number 9. We were just kids, 13 years old, and halfway through our last term before summer break. It was 1986 in Manchester, and the only thing more exciting than the end of school was the rumor that we were going to dig up the old time capsule buried behind the science block. Mr. Flannery, our headmaster, made it sound like a treasure hunt. He said it had been buried by students in the 1950s, and nobody had opened it since. It was part of some school history project. A glimpse into the past, he called it. We didn't care about the past. We just wanted to see if someone had left behind a cool toy, or maybe old coins we could brag about. They chose 5 of us to do the digging. Me, Stephen Hughes, Kate Lyle, Darren Myers, and Lenny Doyle. We were the more responsible ones, apparently. I don't think that meant much. Kate got in trouble every week for talking back. Darren once set fire to a bin outside the gym, and Lenny once ate a frog on a dare. But we were there early that morning with spades, supervised by Mr. Flannery, and a janitor named Ron, who never said more than 3 words at a time. The digging didn't take long. The earth behind the science block was soft, mossy. We thought we'd be there all morning, but within 20 minutes, Darren hit something solid. It wasn't even buried that deep, maybe 1.5 feet down. The box was small and metal, rusted on the edges, but it looked intact. "Careful with that," Mr. Flannery said, a bit too quickly. We all stood around as he wiped it clean with a rag. The janitor looked uneasy. He kept glancing toward the corner of the field, where the old fence separated the schoolyard from the graveyard next door. Nobody ever talked about the graveyard. It had been there longer than the school itself. Most of us had family buried there, but it always felt like something we weren't supposed to acknowledge, like saying the word cancer in a hospital. When Mr. Flannery pried the lid open, we crowded closer. At first, it looked like a bunch of paper, letters, a torn scarf, an empty cigarette tin, a small school badge with the old crest. We were disappointed, honestly. No treasure, no coins, no toys. And then Darren pulled out the cloth bundle. It was stiff, stained brown in patches, tied with string that crumbled as he touched it. He started to unwrap it, and then went pale. "Is that?" Kate whispered. It was teeth. Human teeth. A full bundle of them. Dozens. Some large and square, others tiny and pointed like a child's. Some were discolored. Some still had bits of gum attached. One had a silver filling. Another was chipped in half. I remember Stephen gagging and walking away. Darren dropped the bundle and the teeth spilled onto the grass. They made a sound I'll never forget, like marbles clinking against concrete. "What the hell is this?" I said before I could stop myself. Mr. Flannery knelt down and started gathering the teeth without gloves, stuffing them back into the cloth. His face was tight, lips drawn into a thin line. He wasn't shocked, that's what I noticed. He wasn't even surprised. "Don't talk about this," he said, not looking up. "This is school property, not a matter for children." Kate asked, "But why would anyone put that in a time capsule?" "No more questions," he snapped. He stood up, took the box, and walked back inside, the janitor following close behind with a shovel in hand like nothing had happened. We never saw that box again. That should have been the end of it, but it wasn't. Kate, being Kate, couldn't let it go. That afternoon she dragged me to the school library. We didn't have Google back then, just a bunch of dusty binders and microfiche. She found a local paper archive in the back corner and started digging. "Do you think this has something to do with the graveyard?" I asked. "I think Flannery knew exactly what was in that box," she replied. "It took us 2 days, but we found it." A headline from 1953. "Tooth collector strikes again. Children's graves vandalized in North Manchester Cemetery." There were 3 articles over a 3-week span. Someone had been breaking into graves, specifically the graves of young children, and removing teeth. Police suspected it was for ritualistic purposes, but they never caught the person. It stopped after the 3rd week. They blamed it on grave robbers or pranksters, but Kate pointed out something I missed. "Look," she said, tapping the last paragraph of the final article. "It says the last vandalized grave belonged to a girl named Annabelle Flannery, the headmaster's daughter." We stared at each other. "That can't be a coincidence," I muttered. The next week, Stephen stopped coming to school. His mum said he was sick. Then Darren stopped showing up too. I called his house. His mum said he'd been having nightmares, couldn't sleep, woke up screaming about teeth. Lenny told me his own teeth had started to hurt constantly, like they were going to fall out. I wish I could say I was stronger, but I wasn't. I had nightmares too. Teeth falling out of my mouth by the handful. My own voice echoing in my ears, saying things I didn't remember thinking. I stopped eating solid food for a week. My gums were sore. I started carrying a mirror to school, checking my teeth between classes. Kate stayed normal, or maybe she just hid it better. One morning she pulled me aside. "We need to see the grave," she said. "Annabelle Flannery." We climbed the fence after school and walked through the overgrown rows. The grave was easy to find. A tiny stone angel, barely taller than my knee, leaning sideways with age. Her name was etched neatly in the marble. Annabelle Flannery, 1946-1953. Someone had placed fresh flowers. Recent. White roses, not wilted. "Who brings flowers to a grave every week for 40 years?" Kate asked quietly. I didn't want to know, but she was already pulling the soil loose with her hands. I panicked. "We can't, this is illegal." "We already found human remains at school," she said. "This is the next piece." We didn't dig deep, just enough to scrape past the grass and uncover the top of a wooden box buried just below the surface. A child-sized coffin. Kate reached into her backpack and pulled out a flashlight. She ran the light over the edges. One side had been pried open, then nailed shut again. She didn't say anything, just looked at me with this pale, cold expression. The next day, she was called to the headmaster's office. She never came back to class. Her parents said they were transferring her, said she'd had disciplinary problems. But Kate was one of the top students. She'd never even been suspended. That same week, the janitor vanished. Nobody talked about him, nobody asked. His name was wiped off the staff board like he'd never existed. I tried asking Mr. Flannery where Kate had gone. He looked at me like I was a stranger. "There was never a student named Kate Lyle in your class," he said. I told my mom. She didn't believe me. She told me to stop making things up, said I needed to focus on my exams. So I stopped talking about it. Years passed. I grew up, got a job, moved across the city, tried not to think about it anymore. Teeth stopped falling out in my dreams. Life returned to normal. On the surface. Until this year. I came back to Manchester last month. My mum passed away and I had to clear out her house. While sorting through some of my old school stuff, I found a box of year-end photos. Class of 1986. There we were, me, Stephen, Darren, Lenny. But no Kate. Not even in the background. I flipped the photo over. Names were written in pen by someone's mum. All of them, except the space next to where Kate should have been, blank. Not scratched out, just never written. I would have thought I imagined her. Except inside the same box was something else. A folded note, yellowed and creased. It read, "If they erase me, dig where the roses bloom." I went back. The cemetery hadn't changed much. Still quiet, still crooked. I found Annabelle's grave again. No flowers this time. I brought a trowel. I dug for hours, deeper than before, until I hit something hard. Another metal box, this one newer, sealed tight. I pried it open. Inside was a photo of Kate, aged 13, in her school uniform, smiling. Beneath it, dozens more teeth. Bagged, labeled, each with a name. One of them was mine. I checked my mouth with shaking hands. All my teeth were still there. That night, I didn't sleep. The next day I took the box to the police. They didn't know what to do with it. They took my statement, promised to investigate. A week later, they called to say the evidence had been misfiled. No record of my visit, no box, nothing. But I kept a copy of the photo. I scanned it, backed it up, sent it to every old classmate I could find. Most didn't remember Kate. Stephen did, barely. He just said, "I thought she moved. I always thought she moved." I'm telling you this now because I don't know how much longer I'll remember it myself. Every year, one of us disappears. Darren, Lenny, gone from records, from memory, like they were never real. I keep brushing my teeth, every morning, every night, counting them. 32, so far. And I've planted a rose bush in my garden. Just one. A reminder. Because the scariest thing wasn't the teeth. It was that someone had a list. And my name's still on it. Story number 10. It's been over 30 years since that afternoon, but I still flinch when I hear children laugh near fences or trees. I still avoid graveyards. Not because I'm superstitious, but because of what really happened that day. We weren't hunting ghosts, we were just playing hide and seek. It was the summer of 1991, and we were a bunch of neighborhood kids killing time before school started again. Perth wasn't exactly overflowing with entertainment, especially back then, especially for kids whose parents worked long shifts or didn't really care where they were during the day. I was 12, old enough to know better, maybe, but still stupid enough to think I'd live forever. There were 6 of us that day, me, my cousin Jamie, twins named Kayla and Kurt, a younger kid named Marcus, and Emily, who was 9 and constantly trying to prove she could hang with the older crowd. Emily was small for her age, all elbows and skinned knees, but she was fast and clever. I remember her having this wild, curly mess of red hair she always tied in a ponytail so tight it pulled her eyes slightly upward. She didn't talk much, but when she did, you listened. She was sharp. The cemetery wasn't far from our street. We used to cut through it on the way to the shops. It was old, real old. Half the gravestones were tilting or cracked, and the back half sloped down into a dip where weeds overtook everything. That's where we played, where nobody could see us from the road. That day, it was hot. The sun had that sick yellow color, the kind that makes everything feel slightly off. We didn't bring water or food, just a couple of chocolate bars melting in someone's pocket, and a pack of playing cards no one actually used. We decided on hide and seek, which Emily loved. She was always hiding in weird places, under porches, in sheds, even once in a storm drain. She didn't scare easily. That's why no one worried when she offered to hide first. Jamie volunteered to be it. He started counting behind the big obelisk in the center, while the rest of us took off running. I don't know where Emily went. None of us saw. We gave her the usual 5 minutes. It stretched to 7, then 10. Jamie shouted, "Ready or not?" and started searching. The rest of us helped, sort of. We'd peek behind the same headstones, pretending to look. I remember passing by the statue of an angel with one wing missing and thinking Emily might be behind it. She wasn't. We checked the bushes, even the little maintenance shed near the edge. Still nothing. At first, it was funny. "She's really hiding," we laughed. "She's going to win." We called her name, no answer. Then we started to actually look. Like, really look. We split up. I checked the slope where the old graves were covered in weeds. Jamie doubled back toward the trees lining the fence. Kayla got nervous first. She said Emily wouldn't go this long without bragging. Kurt agreed. We all met near the center again. Still no Emily. It got quiet then. Really quiet. Not in a spooky way. Just a sudden, pressing stillness. Like something was waiting for us to realize how serious it was. Jamie said we should go to her house. Maybe she snuck home. It wasn't far. I remember running faster than I ever had, my heart thudding so loud it made me dizzy. Emily's mum opened the door, still in her uniform from the bakery. The moment she saw our faces, she froze. "What happened?" she asked. I remember that clearly. Not, "What's wrong?" or "What are you kids doing here?" Just, "What happened?" We told her. She didn't scream. She didn't collapse. She just walked to the phone and called the police. They came fast. An officer and a woman in plain clothes who asked us questions over and over. Where we last saw her, what she was wearing, had she said anything strange that day. I remember Emily had a purple backpack. She brought it everywhere, even though she barely kept anything in it except a small notebook, a pencil stub, and some weird rock she found once and swore was lucky. They searched the graveyard. Dogs came the next morning. News vans arrived by afternoon. The whole city felt like it stopped breathing. And then they found it. Her backpack, not tossed in the bushes, not near a bench, but inside a fresh grave. A worker doing maintenance noticed the soil on one of the older plots was loose, damp and uneven, like it had been disturbed. When they dug, they found the backpack down about 2 feet in, clean, untouched, no damage, the lucky rock still inside. But no Emily. I remember her mum screaming when the detective told her. Not a sob, not a cry. A raw, animal sound that made my stomach twist. It was the only time I saw an adult truly lose control. They checked every grave nearby. Nothing else was found. No body, no footprints, no signs of a struggle. Just that bag. Days turned into weeks. Posters went up, searches expanded. They drained a nearby pond. Nothing. After a while, people stopped asking. The news moved on. Her mom eventually moved away. Couldn't stay in the same house. Can't blame her. But here's the part no one ever really asked me about. The part I never shared until now. 3 days after Emily vanished, I went back to the cemetery alone. I don't know why. Maybe guilt. Maybe hope. I sat by the grave where her bag was found. I didn't expect anything, but I needed to feel close to her. And that's when I saw it. Carved into the base of the nearby headstone, not fresh but recently exposed like the soil had shifted, was a single word: found. It wasn't the family name on the stone. It wasn't etched in the same way. It was rough, like someone had scraped it in with a rock or key. I stared at it for a long time, tried to tell myself it had always been there, but I knew that grave. It had no markings before. We used to sit on it during games. I ran. I didn't tell anyone. What could I say? They'd think I was hallucinating or just overwhelmed. And maybe I was. But years later, when I went back as an adult, on a random visit back home, I checked that grave again. The word was gone. Not faded. Gone. Like the stone had been scrubbed or replaced. But that's not all. I met with Jamie that night. We hadn't seen each other in years. I asked if he ever thought about what happened. He looked tired. Said he tries not to. Then he told me something I hadn't known. A week after Emily vanished, his mum had found a small envelope slipped through their mail slot. No stamp, no return address. Inside was a single Polaroid. It was a photo of the 6 of us. From that day. Except we were all standing in a row. All 7 of us. Emily in the center. But not the way she looked that day. Older, maybe 12 or 13, like she'd aged just slightly. Her expression blank, almost confused. The photo was burned at the bottom corner. His mum never showed the police. She thought someone was messing with them. Jamie kept it hidden in a book for years until it disintegrated from moisture. We don't know who took it. We don't know where she went. But here's what I think now. I don't think Emily was kidnapped in the way we understand it. I don't think it was someone lurking in the bushes or watching us from the fence. I think she went somewhere, or was pulled somewhere close, but separate. And for some reason, someone, or something, needed us to know she was found. I've spent my whole adult life trying to forget that word, but it still comes back to me at night, carved into my dreams like stone. I still wonder, was it a message? And for me? Or a warning? But that's where it ends. There was no more contact, no more clues, no return. Emily never came back. Her case is still officially open, but unofficially no one's looking anymore. Except maybe me. My teeth ached with fear. I still check graveyards when I travel. Still look at the names on stones. Still glance down when the dirt looks just a little too fresh. Because sometimes, I think, if she could vanish there, then what's stopping it from happening again? But I know this much. We played hide and seek. And Emily won. Forever. Story number 11. I've dug graves for 31 years. The thing about burying people is, you get used to silence. There's no applause at a burial, no cheers, no music, just the sound of soil hitting wood. That's my world. Was, anyway. Until last fall, when the notes started showing up. It was October of 1988, and Belfast had calmed down a bit from the chaos of the 70s, though tension still hung over the city like fog that wouldn't lift. I worked at a modest funeral home just off Ormeau Road. Small staff, just me and my apprentice Darren. He was a good lad, young, still thought he could fix the world. I let him. Someone should believe in that sort of thing. The first note showed up at the burial of a woman named Maureen Callahan, 76, died of heart failure in her sleep. I handled the coffin myself, as always. As I adjusted the earth and pressed the last bit of turf around the grave, I noticed something, half tucked beneath the headstone. It was a child's drawing, crayon on a torn bit of notebook paper. A sun in the corner, a smiling stick figure, and under it the words, "You are safe now, love, E." I figured maybe one of Maureen's grandkids left it. Sweet gesture, didn't think twice. But it happened again. 3 days later, a burial for Kevin Rafferty, only 45, died in a car accident. As we lowered the casket, I noticed Darren quietly bending near the grave's edge. After the family left, I asked him what he was picking up. He held it up, another child's drawing. This one was of a tree and 2 people holding hands. "Goodbye, I'll see you soon. E." Darren shrugged. "Think it's a kid playing some game?" But no kids had been at Kevin's funeral. A week later, at the burial of Helen Macaulay, I found another. This one was tucked right under the floral cross. A drawing of a little house, a cat beside the door, and someone in the window. "Don't be scared anymore. I'm watching." E. That's when my gut twisted. It wasn't the words, it was the handwriting. You see, I lost my daughter Eleanor 6 years ago. She was 8. Pneumonia, quick and brutal. I wasn't the kind of father who kept every scrap of paper, but I'd saved a few of her school assignments, her birthday cards to me, little sketches of our family, and the way the E curled slightly leftward, how she dotted the I with a small circle. That wasn't coincidence. That was hers. I didn't tell Darren, I just kept the note and went home, pulling out Eleanor's old folder from the top shelf of my wardrobe. I compared them under the lamp. It was exact. Every tilt, every stroke. My hands started shaking. I hadn't touched her things in years, not since we boxed her room and made it into a spare study. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I went straight to the office and pulled every burial log from the past 2 months. 27 funerals. I checked the notes, records, attendees. Nothing linked them. No repeating family name, no mutual parish, no pattern of age or gender. Rich, poor, Catholic, Protestant. It didn't matter. Only that they had died, and someone had left a note in a child's hand signed with an E. I began arriving earlier at the graveyard, walking the site alone before families came, and I started to notice something chilling. Every drawing was different, tailored in some way to the deceased. For a soldier, it was a child hugging a man in uniform. For a woman who died alone, a drawing of 2 people holding hands in a park, and always that same hopeful line at the end, "You're safe now," or "Don't worry," or "I'm here." I had to know more. I started asking quiet questions during services, whether the deceased had children and if any of them were named E. No one said yes. In fact, many didn't have kids at all. And yet the notes kept coming. One afternoon, I confronted Darren. I asked if he'd been leaving them as a prank. He looked hurt. "No, Mr. Keene, that'd be sick. I'd never mess with the dead like that." I believed him. That night, I stayed at the cemetery. I knew the next burial was scheduled for the morning, and I wanted to see if the note appeared beforehand. I brought a flask, a lantern, and an old wool coat. I waited on the bench across from the fresh grave. Around 3 a.m., I must have dozed off. I woke to a rustle, a small sound like paper brushing against stone. I sat up, heart thumping. There, near the base of the grave, a small figure stood. I thought maybe a teenager, but as I looked closer, I realized it was a woman. Frail, thin, wrapped in a threadbare coat. She had long hair that looked silver in the moonlight. She knelt, placed something on the grave, and stood again. Slowly she turned, and she looked directly at me. I didn't move. I don't think I could. Her face was lined but gentle, with the sadness behind her eyes that felt endless. She didn't run. She just gave me the smallest nod and walked away, toward the trees at the far edge. I rushed to the grave, another drawing, a child and an old woman sitting side by side. "Thank you for the stories. I missed them." I kept watch every night after that. And she came back twice more. Each time a new note, a new drawing, always placed with the same tenderness. I followed her once, keeping low behind the hedges. She never looked back. She walked half a mile to a quiet lane with an old red brick house. She went inside. No lights came on. The next morning I went to that house, knocked twice, no answer. I checked with a neighbor trimming his hedges. He told me the house belonged to an older woman named Margaret. "Bit odd but kind," he said. "Takes care of her niece's daughter, has for years. Poor girl's been different since she was small. Draws all day, barely speaks." The hair rose on my neck. "Her name?" He squinted. "Ellen, I think? Or Eleanor, something like that. Same name as her aunt's daughter, who passed away when she was a child." I didn't go back to the house. I didn't need to. I knew what I was looking for wasn't there. Not anymore. The strange thing was, the notes stopped after that. The next few funerals? Nothing. No drawings. No signs. As if the person behind it had finished whatever they were meant to do. Months passed. I told myself I'd imagined it, that maybe grief messes with memory, and the brain fills in things that comfort the heart. I let it rest. But then something happened. A year later, in early spring, we had a burial for a boy, only 10 years old, leukemia. His parents were shattered. After they left, I did my usual sweep. Nothing except a folded page resting on the bench nearby. Not on the grave, just left where I always sat. I opened it. It was different from the others. Not a crayon sketch, but pen on paper. A note. Written in cursive. "Some souls look after others when no one else can. Thank you for letting me help, E." I sat there a long time, I don't know how long. I read it again and again, until the ink smudged beneath my thumb. I kept that final note. It's tucked inside the folder with Eleanor's old cards, now placed in a wooden box beside her photo. I don't need answers anymore. I don't need to know whether someone was copying her handwriting, or whether that girl in the red brick house had visions, or whether grief opens doors we shouldn't walk through. I just know this. Whatever that was, it wasn't evil. It wasn't horror. It was kindness. And in my line of work, buried deep beneath sorrow and silence, I've come to believe that kindness is the only thing stronger than death. So now, when I bury someone, anyone, I leave something small in the grave. Not a note. Just a smooth stone with a letter E scratched into it. For the ones she watched over, and for whatever peace comes after. Story 12. It was a quiet evening when I noticed something strange, something that would make me question everything I thought I knew about the little things I do every day. My name is Daniel, and I'm in my late 20s, living alone in a modest apartment in the city. I work as a software developer for a small tech company, which means most of my time is spent in front of a computer screen. It's not the most exciting job, but it's stable, and it allows me to live comfortably. In my downtime, I usually stick to a simple routine, watching TV, going out for a run, or occasionally going to the local store for a quick grocery run. I'd never been the type of person to obsess over the small details of life. Sure, I would sometimes notice something off in my routine, but I'd chalk it up to nothing more than coincidence. But that day, something felt different. Something I couldn't ignore. I had just finished up a late shift and decided to swing by the local convenience store on my way home. I was in the mood for a snack, something sweet to balance out the long hours I'd spent staring at code. I grabbed a bag of chips, some chocolate, and a few bottles of water. It wasn't anything out of the ordinary, just another night of mundane errands. As I wandered through the aisles, I found myself grabbing the usual items without much thought. I picked up a box of cereal, a bag of coffee beans, and a few frozen meals for the upcoming week. After a few minutes, I made my way to the checkout counter, still thinking about the work waiting for me at home. The cashier, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, rang up my items without saying much. Her movements were quick and efficient, and I was grateful for the simplicity of the transaction. But as she scanned the items, something strange happened. One by one, the price stickers on the items began to peel off on their own. At first, I thought it was just a glitch with the packaging or maybe the scanner, but then I saw something underneath. I leaned forward, my curiosity piqued. Beneath the price sticker, the paper had been replaced by someone's handwriting. Neat yet oddly rushed, the words were written in a hurried scrawl that looked as though they had been hastily scribbled on the products. My stomach tightened with confusion. The first item, a bag of chips, had a simple message written on it: "They're watching." I blinked, unsure if I had read it right. I stared at the bag, then at the cashier, who had paused for a moment before resuming her work. She didn't seem to notice anything out of the ordinary. I picked up the next item, the box of cereal. This time the message read, "Leave now." My heart skipped a beat. I looked around the store, suddenly aware of how quiet it was. Was this some sort of prank? But no one was around, and the cashier was still scanning items, oblivious to what was happening. I felt a growing sense of unease as I turned the box of coffee beans over. The handwriting was still there, and this time it was even more direct. "Don't look back." My hands were trembling now, and I began to feel like I was losing my grip on reality. What was going on? Who had written these messages, and why were they under the price stickers of items I had just picked up? I decided I had to get out of the store. I quickly paid for my items, trying to keep calm, though my mind was racing. As I walked out of the store, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was following me. The air felt heavier, charged with an unease that I couldn't explain. I told myself I was overreacting. This was probably just some weird coincidence, a prank, maybe even a marketing stunt. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. Once I got home, I dumped the items onto the kitchen counter. I picked up the bag of chips first, staring at the message beneath the sticker. "They're watching." It was absurd. I laughed nervously, trying to convince myself it was nothing. But then I looked at the cereal box again, and the coffee beans. The handwriting was consistent, and it all felt too deliberate to be a simple joke. I couldn't explain it. I decided to check the rest of the items I had bought. Each one had a price sticker, and each time I peeled it off, there was more writing beneath it. The words seemed more urgent, more commanding. "Get out while you can, they're not far." The messages were starting to get to me, gnawing at my sense of reality. What was happening? Why was I being singled out? I spent the rest of the night pacing around my apartment, my mind racing. It was late and I was exhausted, but sleep wouldn't come. I had to figure this out. Was it just a coincidence that these items had been marked with messages, or was someone who knew about me, deliberately trying to communicate with me? I kept running the scenarios over and over in my head, each more bizarre than the last. Finally, I decided to go back to the store. I had to know if I was imagining things or if something more sinister was at play. The store had closed for the night, but I figured I could at least get some answers from the manager. I grabbed the items I had bought earlier and made my way out the door. When I arrived, the store was dark and the parking lot was empty. I felt a wave of apprehension wash over me, but I pushed it aside. I walked up to the door, trying the handle. To my surprise, it opened. It was unlocked. I stepped inside cautiously, the sound of my footsteps echoing in the stillness. The shelves were just as I remembered them, but the store felt off. The fluorescent lights flickered above, casting strange shadows in the corners. I walked to the back of the store, where the manager's office was, but when I reached it, there was no one there. The office was empty, and the light was off. It felt like the whole store had been abandoned. I stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do. Then, as I turned to leave, something caught my eye. On the counter, right next to the register, was a small stack of price stickers. But these weren't regular stickers. As I stepped closer, I saw that the handwriting on them was the same as the one I had seen on the products. "They're watching you," it said. I couldn't breathe. The realization hit me like a wave. Whoever had been leaving these messages, whoever had been watching me, was closer than I realized. I wasn't just involved in some random prank or mistake. I had become a part of something much bigger, and I didn't know how to get out of it. I turned and ran out of the store, my heart pounding in my chest. Something was happening, something I couldn't understand, but I knew one thing for sure. It wasn't over. I didn't sleep that night. After running out of the store, the sense of dread only grew. I couldn't stop thinking about the messages, the handwriting, and the eerie realization that someone, or something, was watching me. The thought made my skin crawl. Who was behind it? Why me? I had never been one to believe in conspiracy theories or supernatural events, but this situation was starting to feel like something out of a horror story. The next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. Everywhere I went, I felt eyes on me. Whether it was the old man in the coffee shop who seemed to be staring a little too long, or the woman crossing the street who looked like she was glancing over her shoulder, I felt paranoid. But I knew I couldn't just ignore it. I had to figure out what was happening before it drove me mad. I decided to return to the store once more. I couldn't get rid of the nagging suspicion that the answers were there, somewhere in that seemingly mundane place. When I walked in, the atmosphere felt even more suffocating than before. It wasn't the same store I had entered days ago. It was darker, quieter, as though something had changed overnight. The shelves looked untouched, the aisles the same, but I couldn't shake the feeling that everything had shifted. I walked up to the register, where the same cashier had been the night I discovered the handwritten messages. She wasn't there this time, but the manager, a middle-aged man I had seen occasionally, was standing behind the counter. He gave me a quick glance when I approached, his eyes narrowing slightly as if recognizing me. "Can I help you?" he asked, but his voice lacked the warmth it had the last time I was there. It was almost guarded. "I need to ask you something," I said, my voice trembling. "I had bought some items here the other day, and I found something strange. There were handwritten messages under the price stickers." The manager looked at me for a moment, his face unreadable. Then he sighed, as if resigning himself to something. "I know," he said quietly. "I've been waiting for you to come back." I froze. "You've been waiting for me?" He nodded. "I didn't want to get you involved, but you've seen too much now. You're part of it." "Part of what?" I demanded, my heart racing. "What is going on here? What do you mean?" He glanced around nervously before lowering his voice. "It's not just you, you know. It's been happening to others, but they don't know what's going on either. People buy these items, and the messages start showing up. The handwriting, the strange occurrences. It's all part of something much bigger than anyone realizes." I could feel my anxiety building. "What do you mean, part of it? What are you talking about?" The manager looked down at the counter, avoiding my gaze. "I can't explain everything right now, but there's a reason you're here. You've been chosen. You saw the messages. You'll start to see more soon. The store, the items. You've come into contact with something, or someone, and now you can't get out." My mind was spinning. Chosen for what? Why me? He didn't answer immediately. He seemed lost in thought, and I could tell he was weighing something, whether or not to say more, whether or not to reveal whatever secret the store was hiding. Finally, he sighed heavily and looked up at me. "There's something about certain people," he said quietly. "People who are sensitive, for lack of a better word. You might have noticed it too, right? How things just don't feel right. How everything seems off. This store, the items we sell, they aren't just normal products. There's something deeper behind them. Something that has been manipulating things for years, long before I started working here." I stared at him, my mind reeling. This was insane. What does this have to do with me? What's happening? People like you, he said, are being pulled into something larger, something that doesn't make sense, but it's real. There's a group of us, people who have noticed it. I could barely process his words. So, I'm part of some experiment? Some conspiracy? I asked, unable to wrap my mind around the idea. He looked at me seriously. Not exactly. It's not an experiment, but it's not coincidence either. It's like you've been marked, drawn into something, and if you don't figure it out, if you don't stop it, then, well, things will only get worse. My head was swimming. I had gone from picking up snacks at the store to being thrust into some convoluted, eerie mystery I couldn't even understand. How do I stop it? What do I do now? The manager hesitated before handing me a small, folded piece of paper. Take this. It's a list of names. People who have been through the same thing. Reach out to them. They might be able to help you figure out what to do next. But be careful. Whoever, or whatever, is behind this doesn't want you to know the truth. I stared at the paper in my hand, my heart racing. It felt like I was holding the key to something dangerous, something I couldn't ignore. And what about you? You know all this, and you're still here? He met my gaze, his expression grim. I've been part of it for years. I can't escape. But you can. You still have a choice. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. I had been chosen, whether I liked it or not, and now I had to find a way to break free from whatever dark force was controlling this. I didn't know what I had walked into, but I knew one thing. It wasn't just going to go away on its own. I left the store, the small piece of paper burning a hole in my pocket. As I walked back to my apartment, I felt the weight of everything settling on my shoulder. The world felt different somehow, like the veil had been lifted, and I was seeing things for what they really were. I didn't know how I was going to stop whatever was happening, but I couldn't run away. I had to find the answers, and I would stop at nothing to uncover the truth. The days that followed felt like a blur. I couldn't focus on anything, work, daily life, or even eating properly. My mind kept returning to the conversation I had with the manager and the unsettling truth he had revealed. People like me had been marked, drawn into something much larger than I could comprehend. The paper he had given me, with a list of names, seemed like the only thread I had left to cling to. But with every passing hour, I grew more anxious. That night, I made up my mind. I had to find these people, the ones who had experienced what I was going through. The list in my pocket was burning a hole, urging me to act. I opened it and stared at the names written in uneven handwriting. There were 5 names in total, but I didn't know where to start. I decided to try the first one on the list. A woman named Claire Thompson. Her address was just a few streets over from mine, which gave me a small sense of relief. When I arrived at her address, it was a quiet, suburban neighborhood, much like mine. The house was small but well kept. As I rang the doorbell, my heart pounded in my chest. I had no idea what to expect, but this was my only lead. The door opened slowly, revealing a woman in her mid-30s, her eyes wary but curious. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice calm but cautious. I took a deep breath. "My name is Daniel. I found your name on a list and I need to talk to you. I think I'm involved in something strange and I need answers." She blinked, then stepped back, allowing me to enter. "Come inside," she said. "We need to talk." We sat down in her living room and I could see the hesitation in her eyes, as if she was unsure about revealing too much. "You're not the first one to show up," she said quietly. "I've been through what you're describing, and I think I can help you, but you need to understand that it's dangerous." I leaned forward, desperate to know more. "What's happening? What is this? Why are we being targeted?" Claire sighed deeply, her fingers gripping the armrest of the chair. "The store? It's not just a store. It's part of something bigger, a system, if you will. People like us, who've been marked, we're part of a larger plan. The messages, the items, it's all part of a manipulation, a test. They've been doing this for years and we've been swept up in it." I could feel the weight of her words sink in. Who's behind this? Who's doing this to us? Her gaze hardened. It's a shadow organization. I don't know all the details, but I know this. They don't want us to figure it out. They've been watching, pulling strings, manipulating events, and once you're in, there's no getting out unless you play by their rules. My mind raced. So what do I do now? How do I stop it? Claire looked at me for a long moment. You can't stop it. Not completely. But you can fight back. You have to find the source, the root of it all. That's the only way. But you have to be careful. The people behind this won't stop until you're silenced. I nodded slowly, trying to process everything. I had come to Claire for answers, and while I had learned more, I felt more lost than ever. This wasn't just some random conspiracy, it was a calculated plan, one that had been playing out behind the scenes for years, and now I was part of it. I stood up, feeling the gravity of my decision. I'll do whatever it takes, I said firmly. I can't let this go. I need to know the truth. Claire reached out and put a hand on my arm. Be careful. They're always watching. Don't trust anyone. Not even the people who seem like allies. I walked out of her house that night, my mind a whirlwind of thoughts. The pieces were starting to come together, but the puzzle was far from complete. I didn't know where to go from here, but one thing was certain. I was no longer a bystander in my own life. I was a part of something bigger, something dark, and now I had to face it. As I walked back to my apartment, I glanced over my shoulder. The shadows seemed to move, the feeling of being watched never far behind me. But I couldn't stop now. I had to keep going. The truth was out there, waiting for me to uncover it, and I wouldn't rest until I did. Story 13. It was just another Thursday evening when I received a last-minute assignment from my boss. I'm a freelance photographer, and while most of my work is fairly straightforward, shooting events, portraits, and product photos, every now and then I get a job that's a little different. This one was no exception. My client, a high-end real estate agent, had asked me to take photos of a newly renovated house in a secluded part of town. The house had been on the market for a while, and they wanted to get some fresh, high-quality images to help sell it. I wasn't thrilled about the location. It was in an isolated area, far from the hustle of the city, but it was a good-paying job. The agent told me the house had been vacant for months, and I'd be working alone, which was fine by me. I wasn't exactly fond of shooting with a team. It was easier to get the shots I wanted without other people in the way. The instructions were simple. Show up, take the photos of the interior, and be done by sunset. The agent also gave me some specific notes about keeping the curtains closed and the lights off during the shoot, as it was supposed to create a moody atmosphere. I didn't think much of it. It was a bit unusual, but I figured it was just part of the agent's creative direction. I drove out to the property, listening to my music as I passed the quiet streets. The house was a large, two-story home with an old stone exterior, nestled in a wooded area. As I pulled into the driveway, I couldn't help but notice how secluded the place was. The surrounding trees seemed to block out most of the natural light, and there was a strange stillness to the air. I parked my car and grabbed my camera gear from the back seat. There was a slight chill in the air, which made me shiver as I walked up the front steps. The front door was unlocked, just as the agent had said it would be, and I stepped inside. The house was spacious, with high ceilings and large windows that let in just enough light for me to get started. I set my gear down in the living room and started by taking a few wide-angle shots of the space. The walls were freshly painted, the floors polished, and the furniture looked brand new. It was a beautiful house, but something about it felt off. The silence was almost too perfect, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I tried to push the thought aside, reminding myself that I was alone in the house and focused on the task at hand. I moved through the rooms, adjusting the settings on my camera to capture the soft, dim light that filtered through the windows. I took photos of the kitchen, the bathrooms, the bedrooms, all of the details the agent had requested. But as I worked my way through the house, I noticed something strange. The curtains in each room were all drawn tightly shut. I thought this was odd, especially since the agent hadn't mentioned anything about the windows being covered, but I didn't think much of it at the time. Maybe it was just part of the mood they wanted to create for the photos. As I moved to the final room on the second floor, I felt a chill run down my spine. It was the master bedroom, and the curtains were drawn in here as well, just as instructed. I stood near the window, my camera ready, and took a few test shots of the room. The view from the window wasn't much to look at, just the dense trees that surrounded the property. It was quiet, almost unnervingly so, and I couldn't help but feel like I wasn't alone anymore. My instincts told me something was off. I had been so focused on the task at hand that I hadn't noticed the strange stillness that had settled in around me. I decided to take a break and step outside for a moment, hoping the fresh air would clear my head. I made my way to the back door, unlocked it, and stepped out onto the porch. The house sat on a large plot of land, and the trees surrounding it seemed to create a wall of green that shut out the world. I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the feeling of unease, and looked around at the peaceful surroundings. It was beautiful, but there was something about the isolation that felt too intense. I turned back to the house, and that's when I saw it, a faint silhouette in the window of the master bedroom. It was barely noticeable at first, just a shadow behind the drawn curtains. I froze, my heart racing. I hadn't seen anyone in the house. I was certain I was alone. Was it the reflection of a tree or a shadow from the other rooms? I wasn't sure, but as I stared at the window, I couldn't deny it. There was someone standing in the room, watching me from inside. I quickly went back into the house, my pulse quickening as I moved through the rooms, calling out, "Hello?" My voice echoed through the empty hallways, but there was no answer. The house remained eerily silent. I reached the master bedroom, opened the door, and turned on the light. The room was exactly as I had left it. Empty. The curtains were still drawn, and there was no sign of anyone. I walked over to the window, my hands trembling as I pulled back the curtain. The view outside was clear, but the trees were now shrouded in darkness, casting long shadows across the yard. No one was there. It felt like a trick of the light, but the feeling of being watched lingered. I didn't know what I had seen, but it was enough to make me feel paranoid. I stood there for a moment, trying to calm myself, telling myself it was just my imagination. But as I turned to leave the room, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been there, standing just behind the curtains, watching me. I double-checked the rest of the house. Nothing. No hidden rooms, no sign of anyone else. I was alone. Yet the strange sense of unease refused to leave me. The curtains had been closed tightly in every room. The instructions from the agent to keep them closed felt more like a warning than a request now. I packed up my equipment quickly, eager to leave. As I walked out the front door, I glanced back at the house one last time. The windows, once dark and mysterious, now seemed to stare back at me, silent and knowing. I couldn't explain what had happened, but I knew one thing for sure. I was never going back to that house. Whoever had been watching me from behind the curtains, whatever had been hiding in those shadows, would stay there, hidden in the silence of the empty rooms. As I drove away from the house, I couldn't help but feel that something was still following me, lurking just out of sight. And though I didn't know who had been watching me from inside, I knew that the house would never leave my mind. It was as though it had a secret, and I had stumbled too close to it. The drive away from the house was tense, and my eyes flickered to the rearview mirror every few seconds, half expecting to see someone following me. I know it was irrational, but the fear that had been gnawing at me since I first saw that silhouette behind the curtains wouldn't let go. The feeling that something wasn't right lingered like a bad taste. I had seen the agent's instructions, and while it was odd to ask me to keep the curtains closed, it didn't explain what I had felt in the house, or what I had seen. After a few minutes of driving, I began to calm down. I told myself that it was all in my head, that I had imagined the figure in the window. I convinced myself that it was just a trick of the light, or perhaps a shadow from a tree outside. Still, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that someone had been watching me. When I got home, I immediately set down my camera gear and tried to push the unsettling experience out of my mind. I tried to focus on something else, my work, a few emails I needed to answer, anything that would distract me. But even as I sat at my desk, my thoughts kept drifting back to the house and the figure behind the curtains. I reached for my phone, thinking that maybe I should text the agent and let them know that everything was fine. Maybe I could get a bit more clarity on why the curtains needed to stay closed. But then I paused, wondering if I was overstepping. It wasn't my place to question their creative direction, even if it had felt wrong. I didn't text the agent. Instead, I decided to let it go. After all, I had done my job, taken the photos, and left the property. It was done. But as I tried to relax that night, the events of the day kept replaying in my mind. When I finally went to bed, I couldn't fall asleep right away. I kept imagining someone standing just outside my window, hidden in the shadows, watching me. The next morning, I decided to put it all behind me. I packed my camera gear into the car, ready to head to another job that would take my mind off the eerie events at the house. But as I got into the car and started the engine, my phone buzzed. It was a message from the agent, Matt. "Hey, I just wanted to thank you again for taking those photos yesterday. They came out great. But I wanted to ask if you could do one more thing for me. I noticed you didn't get the shot of the front of the house like I requested. If you could swing by and grab that shot, I'd really appreciate it. Just try to get it around dusk when the light is best. Let me know." I stared at the message for a long moment. Was he serious? After everything that had happened, after I'd seen someone, or thought I had seen someone, behind those curtains, Matt wanted me to go back? I couldn't believe it. My gut reaction was to just ignore the message, to tell him I had already done my job, but there was something else nagging at me. I had to know if I was being paranoid, or if something really was wrong with that house. Reluctantly, I typed back, agreeing to head over for the front shot she requested. I didn't want to go, but I needed closure. I needed to know what was going on with that house. When I arrived, the sun was beginning to set, just as Matt had asked. The house stood silent in front of me, just as it had the day before, except now it felt even more isolating, more imposing. I parked my car across the street and took a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves. I grabbed my camera bag and stepped out of the car, walking toward the front of the house. As I got closer, I could feel a familiar unease creeping up again. I set up my camera, focusing on the front of the house, trying to shake off the fear that had built up inside me. As I looked through the lens, I couldn't help but glance up at the window, specifically the master bedroom window. I don't know why I did it, but it was almost like I was drawn to it. And then, just as I was adjusting the focus on my camera, I saw it again. A figure, standing behind the curtains. My breath caught in my throat. There, in the dim light, was a shape. It wasn't clear, not fully defined, but I could see it. A shadowy figure, still and motionless, watching me from inside the house. My mind raced. How was this possible? The house was supposed to be vacant. I was sure I hadn't seen anyone when I was inside the day before, so how was someone in there now? I fumbled with my camera, snapping a few shots out of instinct, but I didn't dare get any closer. I quickly packed up my gear, my hands shaking, and walked quickly back to my car. I couldn't get out of there fast enough. My mind was spinning. Had I seen something real? Was I just imagining things again? As I started the car and pulled away from the property, I looked in the rearview mirror. The house seemed to stare back at me, silent and imposing with its curtains drawn. The figure inside was gone now, or at least I couldn't see it anymore, but the feeling didn't go away. In fact, it only grew stronger. Someone had been in that house. Someone had been watching me, hiding behind those curtains. I felt a wave of panic rise in my chest. I had to know what was going on. I had to find out if I was just imagining everything, or if something more sinister was happening. I couldn't just leave it alone. But I also knew I couldn't go back there alone. I pulled over at the nearest cafe and dialed Matt's number. He answered on the third ring, his voice cheerful as always. "Hi, Elias, how's everything going? Did you get that shot for me?" "I did," I replied, my voice tight. "But I need to ask you something. When I was there yesterday, I saw something strange. Someone was behind the curtains in the master bedroom. And then, just now, when I went back to get the shot, I saw it again, a figure watching me." There was a long pause on the other end. When Matt finally spoke, his tone was different. "I didn't think you'd notice that," he said softly. "Look, Elias, there's something I should have told you before. The house is, well, it has a bit of a reputation. Some people say it's haunted, but I never told you that because I didn't want to scare you off. People have seen things there before, shadows, figures, things that aren't really there. You're not the first." My stomach twisted. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "I didn't think it would matter," he said quickly. "I didn't think it would affect your work, but now that you've seen it, I don't know what to say. I need to know what's really going on with that house, Matt. Is there someone living there? Is someone hiding inside?" I demanded. Matt was silent for a long moment. "I can't explain everything, Elias, but you're right about one thing. There's something in that house. Something watching. It's not just you." I didn't know what to say to that. It wasn't just a figure in the window. There was something else in that house. Something I had yet to understand, but I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just a job anymore. This was something I couldn't ignore. "I need to know more," I said, my voice low. "Who's been in the house before? What's going on?" Matt didn't answer right away, and I felt the silence stretch between us. "I'll send you some info," he said eventually. "Just be careful, Elias. Don't go back to that house alone." I ended the call, my thoughts racing. The mystery of the house had only deepened, and I wasn't sure how much more I wanted to uncover. But I knew that I couldn't leave it alone now. Whoever or whatever was behind those curtains was hiding something, and I was determined to find out what. Story 14. That was the year 2019 I moved to the city. I was 25, fresh out of grad school and ready for a change. I found a tiny apartment, landed a job in marketing, and threw myself into the excitement of living somewhere new. The best part? The food. I made it my mission to explore every hidden gem in the city. I tried hole-in-the-wall ramen shops, late-night taco stands, family-owned Italian places tucked between high-rises. Whenever I found a spot I loved, I added it to a list on my phone, my go-to eats. It wasn't anything special, just a simple note where I kept track of places I wanted to revisit. I never shared it, never posted it online, which is why, when I found a handwritten copy of my list sitting on my kitchen counter last night, in someone else's handwriting, I felt a slow, creeping sense of dread. I live alone. My apartment isn't big. Just a one-bedroom with a small kitchen and a living room. I lock the door every night, double-checking it out of habit. I don't have visitors. No cleaning service, no nosy landlord. So when I came home from work and saw the folded paper on my counter, I knew something was wrong. At first I thought maybe I had written it myself and just forgotten, but as soon as I unfolded it, my stomach twisted. The paper was old, slightly yellowed, the ink was faded, and the handwriting wasn't mine. But the words were. Every single restaurant I had ever saved on my phone, all of them listed in perfect order. I stood there frozen, staring at the list. It felt impossible. I pulled out my phone and opened my notes app. I scrolled to my go-to eats list. Identical, same restaurants, same order. Except the one on paper had an extra entry. At the bottom of the list, written in the same unfamiliar handwriting, "See you soon." My breath hitched. I dropped the paper like it had burned me. I checked my door. Locked. The windows. Locked. I checked under my bed, inside my closet, behind the shower curtain. Nothing. There was no sign of a break-in, no forced entry, but someone had been inside, and they knew everywhere I liked to eat. I grabbed my phone and called Rachel. She picked up after 2 rings. "Hey, what's up? I need you to come over." She must have heard something in my voice because she didn't ask questions. On my way. 15 minutes later she arrived. I showed her the paper. She frowned. That's really specific. I swallowed hard. It's my exact list, but I never wrote it down. I never told anyone about it. She studied the handwriting. This isn't yours? I shook my head. Rachel's frown deepened. Then who the hell wrote it? That was the question, wasn't it? We went through every possibility. Could it be a prank? Unlikely. I never posted this list online. No one even knew about it. Could I have written it and forgotten? No. The handwriting wasn't mine. The paper looked too old. Could someone have hacked my phone and copied the list? Maybe, but why go through the trouble of printing it out? And why leave it in my apartment? Rachel tapped her fingers against the counter. What if it's not about the list? I looked at her. What do you mean? What if it's about the last line? She pointed. See you soon. A chill ran down my spine. Rachel stayed with me for a few hours. We searched my apartment again. Nothing. No signs of a break-in, no fingerprints, no footprints. But I knew I hadn't left that note there. Someone else had. And they wanted me to know it. That night, I barely slept. Every sound, the creak of the pipes, the hum of the fridge, made my skin crawl. By 3 a.m., I gave up and turned on my laptop. I searched the restaurants on my list, looking for any connection between them. Did one have security cameras that caught something strange? Did one have a news article about a crime? Nothing. Then, I noticed something. One of the restaurants had closed years ago, but it was still on my list. That didn't make sense. I always kept my list updated. If a place shut down, I deleted it. So why was this one still there? I clicked on the name, a small Italian place, Carmine's, closed in 2018. DABE, a year before I even moved to the city. My hands started to shake. That meant this list wasn't just a copy of mine. It was older. It was from before I even made mine. I stared at the note again, my pulse hammering. This wasn't just a copy of my list. It was the original. Someone had written it years ago. Someone who had been to all my favorite restaurants before I had even discovered them. Someone who had known where I would go before I ever went there. And they had one final message for me. See you soon. I grabbed my phone and called Rachel again. She answered groggily. What? I need to find out who wrote this list. She sighed. James, it's 4 a.m. I don't care, I whispered. Whoever they are, they've been following me for years. Silence. Then, I'm coming over. As soon as Rachel arrived, we started digging. We searched everything, old Yelp reviews, archived web pages, even city records for the closed restaurant. And then, we found something. An old forum post from 2018 titled, Best Hidden Gem Restaurants in the City. I clicked on it, my fingers shaking, and there it was, a perfect match to my list. Same restaurants, same order. And at the bottom, a single comment from an anonymous user. 2 words, see you. My mouth went dry. Rachel whispered, James, what if... Then my phone buzzed. A new text, no name, no number, just one message. Found any good places to eat lately? I dropped my phone. We need to go, now. I didn't argue. We left my apartment, stepped out into the cold night. And I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was already watching us. Rachel and I sat in her car, parked a few blocks away from my apartment. Neither of us spoke for a long time. My phone sat between us, the screen still glowing. Found any good places to eat lately? The message had no sender, no number, just a blank screen where the contact should have been. Someone had gone through the trouble of erasing their identity before sending it. Someone who knew where I ate, someone who had been following me for years. Rachel exhaled sharply. James, someone is messing with you, and they know we're looking for them. I swallowed hard. Then let's stop looking. She turned to me, eyes narrowed. Are you serious? I nodded. This isn't a game. If they can erase their number, if they can get into my apartment without a trace, then they're ahead of us. If we keep digging, we could be making things worse. Rachel bit her lip, her fingers tightening around the steering wheel. I could tell she wanted to argue, but she knew I was right. We drove in silence for a while. I didn't want to go back to my apartment. Not yet. So we ended up at an all-night diner across town. I kept glancing over my shoulder as we sat in a booth by the window, half expecting someone to walk in and sit across from me, just like they had done with my list. Rachel tapped her fingers against the table. Let's think about this logically. Someone had your restaurant list before you ever wrote it. That means one of two things. Either they predicted my choices, I muttered. Rachel nodded. Or they guided you toward them. I frowned. What do you mean? She leaned in, lowering her voice. What if they planted the idea in your head? Maybe you saw a post online. Maybe you overheard a conversation. Something subtle, something you wouldn't even notice. I felt a chill creep up my spine. That would explain why every place on my list had already been written, but that still didn't explain why. Rachel took a slow sip of her coffee. What if it's not just restaurants? I blinked. What? She pulled out her phone. What if it's everything? Your routine, your habits? What if they've been nudging you toward certain things for years? A horrible thought struck me. What if I wasn't making my own choices? What if someone had been subtly steering me toward every decision I thought I had made on my own? I felt sick. I grabbed my phone, ignoring the unread text, and pulled up my location history. Everywhere I had been for the past year. I showed it to Rachel. Let's test this theory. She leaned over, scrolling through the list. Then she froze. James. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I followed her gaze. There was a pattern. Everywhere I had been, every restaurant, every coffee shop, one location kept repeating, a place I had never noticed before. A small bookstore. Grayson's Books. It was listed over a dozen times, but I had no memory of ever going there. Rachel and I exchanged a glance. Neither of us had to say it. We needed to go there. It was just after 3 a.m. when we pulled up to Grayson's Books. The store was closed, the front windows dark, but the neon open 24 hours sign in the corner flickered weakly. Rachel killed the engine. Are we really doing this? I hesitated. Then I thought about the list. The note. The text. Whoever had been watching me wanted me to know, and if I left this alone, if I turned around now, I would never stop wondering. So I unbuckled my seatbelt. Yeah. We are. The bookstore door was unlocked. A soft chime rang out as we stepped inside. The air smelled of old paper and dust. Dim yellow lights flickered overhead. It looked like a normal bookstore, but something felt off. Rachel whispered, "Do you hear that?" I listened. At first there was nothing, then a faint ticking, like a clock. I followed the sound to the back of the store, past shelves filled with books that looked like they hadn't been touched in years, and then I saw it. A single table, with a notebook sitting on top. I stepped forward cautiously. The notebook was open, the pages filled with handwritten notes. My throat went dry, because I recognized the handwriting. It was the same as the note left in my apartment, the same as the list of restaurants. I picked up the notebook with trembling hands. The first entry was dated 2015, the first time I ever visited the city, and it was about me. He's here, finally. He doesn't know yet, but he will. I flipped to another page. He went to Carmine's tonight, just like before. Before? I turned another page. He thinks he's making these choices. He isn't. I felt my stomach lurch. Rachel whispered, "James, we need to go." But I couldn't stop reading. It's almost time. He's figuring it out faster than before. I turned to the final entry, dated yesterday. He's coming here finally, just like he always does. A slow chill crept over my skin. Rachel grabbed my arm. "James, someone's been tracking your life for years. This is sick." I swallowed hard, closing the notebook. And that's when I saw it. Another folded piece of paper. Sitting on the table, I reached for it slowly, my heart in my throat. I unfolded it, dreading what it would say. 3 simple words. Look behind you. Rachel grabbed my wrist. "We're leaving, now." I didn't argue. We ran. Straight out of the store, into the night. Rachel floored the gas pedal as soon as we were in the car. I looked back, half expecting to see someone standing in the doorway. But the bookstore was dark. Empty. Like no one had been there at all. We didn't stop driving until we were across town. I sat in silence, the notebook still clutched in my hands. Rachel let out a shaky breath. "What do we do?" I stared at the words on the page. Someone had been watching me, for years, manipulating my choices, guiding me here, and worst of all, this wasn't the first time, because if the notes were right, I had done this before, and I had no memory of it. I looked at Rachel, my voice hoarse. "We need to find out who wrote this." She nodded, gripping the wheel, and fast. Because whoever they weren't finished yet. Story 15. Back when I was 21, I was single and trying to keep myself from going insane between school, work, and life. I had just transferred to a college 2 towns over from where I grew up. It wasn't exactly far, but it was far enough that I finally felt like I had some breathing room. I rented a small apartment near campus and joined a gym across the street, one of those 24-hour places with keycard access and low lighting. I liked going at night. Less people, no waiting, and honestly, I didn't like being seen sweating through my clothes in broad daylight. I'd just gotten out of a breakup and wasn't really looking to date, but that didn't stop me from scrolling. I was on Bumble, Hinge, and Tinder at different points, but Tinder was where things actually moved. My preferences skewed older. Not for any specific reason, it just felt easier. Guys my age always wanted something instant and temporary. Older guys, especially in their 30s, at least pretended to care. That's how I matched with a man named Adam. He was 35, clean-shaven, sharp jawline, brown eyes, salt and pepper stubble. He looked put together, almost too polished for the app. His profile was normal. Office job, loved dogs. One photo with a Labrador, another with a kayak, and a third one sitting on a patio somewhere, holding a coffee. His bio just said, "Good conversation over a walk in the rain, greater than crowded bars." I remember that part specifically because it felt like something out of a movie. We matched on a Thursday night. He messaged me a minute later, nothing creepy, just, "Hey, your smile makes it feel like tomorrow's already better." That was cheesy, but it didn't feel forced. I replied. We talked casually for about 2 weeks. Nothing too deep. He always messaged me after 10 p.m., said he had late work hours. Sometimes his replies were spaced out, sometimes fast. He never called, no video chats, just text. He never pushed to meet. I was okay with that. One night, I mentioned I had just finished a workout, and he asked where I went. I told him the name of the gym. He said it sounded familiar, said he'd been a member years ago. I didn't think twice about it. The first time I saw him in person, it wasn't planned. It was raining hard and I had just finished a late-night workout. I threw on a hoodie and walked out to the lot, pulling my hood tight over my face. That's when I saw him, just barely, standing across the street under one of the bus stop awnings. He wasn't doing anything. No umbrella, just standing there in the rain, hands in his coat pockets. His head was tilted slightly toward the gym. It took me a second to register that it was Adam. Same face, same posture I'd seen in those pictures. He didn't wave. He didn't approach. He just watched. I was startled, but I didn't feel scared. More confused. I didn't want to be weird, so I texted him. Me. "Were you just at the bus stop?" Adam. "Nope, I'm still at work. Why?" That should have been the moment I walked back inside and called someone, but instead, I convinced myself I was wrong. Maybe it just looked like him. Maybe I was seeing things through the rain. Still, the next time we chatted, I asked for a video call. He declined, said he hated how he looked on camera. I let it go. And I shouldn't have. A week later, it rained again. Same gym, same time. And he was there again, standing at the exact same spot. Under the same awning, not moving, just watching. This time, I didn't text him. I didn't want to play a guessing game. I waited until I got home, locked the door, and checked his messages. He'd sent me something 30 minutes earlier. Rough day, just crashed at my place. You? If he was really home, why was someone who looked exactly like him standing in the rain across the street from where I worked out? That's when I started pulling back. I stopped replying as often. When he'd ask me about my night, I kept it vague. Busy, I'd say, or just tired. He never pressed, but he never disappeared either. His messages stayed consistent, always friendly, always polite. But now I was noticing more. How he only texted after 10, how he always asked if I was at the gym, how he never mentioned a friend, family member, or coworker. It was like he existed only when I messaged him first, like he was only real inside our chat window. Then it stopped raining for almost 2 weeks, and I didn't see him at all. I thought maybe it had just been a weird coincidence. I didn't save the messages, but I started screenshotting them just in case. The next time it rained, I made an excuse not to go to the gym. I stayed home, curled up on the couch with Netflix playing in the background, pretending I wasn't waiting. Around 10:45 am, I got a message. Adam, didn't see you at the gym tonight. I felt the blood rush to my face. I hadn't posted. I hadn't told anyone. I didn't reply. He followed up 5 minutes later. Adam, you okay? I didn't sleep much that night. The next day I went to the front desk at the gym and asked the manager if I could review some of the exterior camera footage. I told him someone might have been following me. He hesitated but agreed to let me take a look. We skipped to the previous rainy nights, late evening hours. Sure enough, in the grainy footage, there he was, a man standing in the shadows near the bus stop. Never approaching the building, just facing it, watching, motionless. I asked if the cameras caught where he went. They didn't. He always walked off screen toward the alley. I went to the police next. I showed them the footage. I showed them the texts. They said without a clear threat they couldn't do much. I asked if they could trace the number. They said maybe, but it'd take a subpoena. And since I hadn't technically been harassed, they couldn't justify that. I left feeling helpless. The next rainstorm came 4 days later. I stayed home again. I didn't touch my phone, but at 11:12 p.m., it lit up on its own. One new message. Adam, I liked watching you walk out with your hoodie half-zipped. You always do that when it rains. I stared at that message for a long time. I didn't open it, just watched the preview on my lock screen as if ignoring it would make it less real. But it was real. He knew about the hoodie, about how I half-zipped it when the rain hit. Something I'd never posted about, never mentioned. That meant he was watching, not just guessing or making educated assumptions. I stayed frozen on the couch, the glow of the TV casting moving shadows on the wall, my phone still clenched in my hand like a live wire. I didn't reply. I didn't sleep. The next morning, I changed everything. I deleted Tinder, blocked the number, requested a new keycard from the gym and told them I'd lost the old one. I didn't go to campus. I emailed my professor and said I was sick, and I finally told my older brother, Kyle. He was the kind of guy who didn't freak out, but I saw the change in his eyes when I told him what had been happening. He offered to come over, to walk me to the gym if I wanted. I told him no, not yet, but I gave him the screenshots. All of them. That weekend, it didn't rain, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. But that relief didn't last, because the next time it poured, he wasn't outside the gym. He was closer. This time, he was standing at the end of my block. It was Friday night. I'd ordered takeout and was about to head down to grab it when I happened to glance out the kitchen window, and there he was, under the streetlight, hood up, standing still as a lamppost, facing my building, facing my window. I ducked instantly. My hands shook as I called Kyle. He answered on the second ring. I didn't waste time explaining. I just said, "He's here." Kyle was already in his truck 2 streets over. He told me to lock everything and stay down. I did. I crawled from the window and sat behind the kitchen island, listening to every sound outside. The thunder was distant, the kind that hums more than cracks. When Kyle arrived 10 minutes later, I heard his horn blare once. By the time I peeked again, the man was gone. Just like that. No footsteps, no sign. Gone. Kyle searched the street while I stayed inside. He didn't find anything. No footprints, no guy ducking around the corner, nothing. But he believed me. I showed him the message again. You always do that when it rains. We filed another report with the police that night, in person this time. They took it more seriously now that there was a potential home encounter. They even agreed to send a patrol car to loop the area on rainy night. But as one officer told me before we left, if he's smart enough to stay off your property, he's hard to pin. I moved in with Kyle the next day. He had a spare room, nothing fancy but safer than being alone in an apartment he could clearly track. We set up a motion camera on the front lawn, a second one inside facing the front door, the footage saved to both of our phones. I didn't tell Jenna. I didn't tell anyone else. Only Kyle knew how far this had gone, and I didn't want to invite more attention. If Nolan, or whoever this man was, wanted something more, I wasn't going to give it to him. I was going to disappear. For a full week, nothing happened. No messages, no sightings. Then one night, when the sky cracked open and the gutters flooded in under an hour, he came back. Only this time, he wasn't outside. He was inside the gym. Kyle had gone with me that night. I figured it was better than staying away forever. We went around 11 p.m. There were only 2 other people inside. One guy on a rowing machine and a woman doing lunges with headphones in. We scanned our cards, walked in, did our workout quietly, and then, halfway through my set, I noticed someone staring through the mirrors, not directly at me, but through the reflection. A man on the far side of the gym near the showers, leaning against the wall, hands in his pockets, watching. He didn't move for the longest time, just stood there. When I turned around to look directly at him, he was gone. I told Kyle. We checked every inch of the place. Locker rooms, office, emergency exit. No one matching that description. The cameras showed a blind spot in the exact corner I'd seen him in. Kyle looked pissed. He knows your pattern better than we thought. We left immediately. On the windshield of Kyle's truck, tucked under the wiper blade, was a single folded note. You don't smile as much anymore, but you're still beautiful. That was the final straw. Kyle reached out to a private investigator. We didn't tell the cops, just paid in cash, handed over the phone records, the gym details, the screenshots, everything. Within 4 days, the PI traced the phone number. The man behind the texts had used a series of burner phones, but one slipped. It had been activated using an ID that matched a former member of the gym, Adam R. Weston, 35, former office worker, lived 20 minutes away, evicted from his apartment in 2018. No criminal record, but 2 former harassment complaints, both dismissed for lack of sustained contact. We had a name, we had a face, and we had a location. The investigator handed the findings to the police with a formal statement. With the camera footage, the notes, and the report, they had enough to issue a restraining order. A detective visited his last known address. He wasn't there. The landlord said he hadn't seen him in a while. Mail piled up. Lights always off. But the window facing the street? The curtains were drawn just enough to peer through. The neighbor across the hall swore she'd seen someone watching through it when it rained. They never found him, but he never contacted me again. That was 3 years ago. I've moved cities since then. New apartment, new job, new number. Kyle still keeps a copy of the original police report and the final message. We talk about it sometimes. How it started as nothing. Just texts. Just watching. And how quickly it changed. Sometimes I still feel like I see him out of the corner of my eye, in a crowd. near a bus stop, on the far end of a parking lot when the sky turns gray, but when I blink, he's never there. I've learned to trust that instinct. I've learned to never work out at night, and I still zip my hoodie all the way up when it rains, just in case. Story 16. It started with the sound of keys, metal scraping against metal, slow and deliberate. I was in the middle of brushing my teeth when I heard it. At first I thought it might be coming from one of the neighboring flats, but as I paused, toothbrush in hand, I realized the sound was coming from my own front door. It was unmistakable. The slow turn of a lock. Then silence. Not a creak, not a footstep, just an unnatural stillness hanging in the air. I rushed out into the hallway barefoot, spitting toothpaste into the sink on the way. My flat was small, just one bedroom and a narrow living space, and the front door wasn't more than 10 steps from the bathroom. I got there just in time to hear a soft click, followed by nothing. The knob didn't rattle, no one knocked. I opened the peephole. The hallway was empty. At that moment, I didn't know this was the beginning of something terrifying. I didn't know that within 24 hours I'd question every sound, every shadow, and most of all my own memory. All I knew was that someone had touched the lock from the outside while I was inside, and that should have been impossible. Let me backtrack a little. My name is Ria. I was 27 at the time and had just moved into a short-term rental in Chennai. I was there for a 2-month work assignment helping a client revamp their corporate branding. My company had paid for the Airbnb, and although it wasn't luxurious, it was private and functional. A second-floor apartment in an older residential building. No frills, but clean. The host was a guy named Naveen, who I'd never met in person. He handled everything through messages and had left the keys in a lockbox for my check-in. The apartment was fine. Plain furniture, white walls, and a tiny balcony that overlooked a bunch of old coconut trees. It was tucked at the end of a corridor, and none of the other flats seemed occupied. That suited me. The first week passed uneventfully. I worked during the day, made instant meals at night, and sometimes took walks in the evening if it wasn't too hot. The building had a weird echo. Footsteps from downstairs often sounded like they were right outside my door, but I got used to that. What I didn't get used to was the door. After that first incident with the lock noise, I started paying closer attention. I checked the bolt before going to bed. I placed a tiny piece of tape at the bottom corner of the doorframe, a trick I'd learned in college just to see if anything moved. For 2 nights, the tape stayed in place. Nothing happened. I told myself I was being paranoid. I blamed it on the unfamiliar setting, the weird acoustics, maybe even a neighbor fumbling with keys at the wrong door. But then, on the 3rd night, I came home to find the tape missing. Not peeled off, not crumpled, just gone. Like someone had removed it cleanly. I froze in the hallway, keys still in hand. I looked around. The corridor was quiet and the other apartment doors looked untouched. I unlocked mine and stepped inside slowly. Nothing seemed out of place. My charger was still plugged in beside the bed. My toothbrush was where I left it. The dishes in the sink were still dirty. But that didn't mean no one had entered. The tape was gone. Someone had either come inside, or they wanted me to think they had. I messaged Naveen right away. Me. Hey, just checking. Has anyone else been given access to the apartment? I had a small security concern. Me say, no, it's only you. No one else has keys. What happened? I told him about the tape, the lock sound, and my general discomfort. He replied a few minutes later saying he'd change the lock if it made me feel safer, but he insisted again that no one had been there. I told him I'd keep an eye out and thanked him for the offer, though I didn't want to escalate it unless I had proof. I still had 10 days left in the apartment. I wasn't going to panic yet. The next morning, I woke up and went to unlock the front door to get some fresh air. That's when I noticed something was seriously wrong. The key didn't fit. Not even halfway. I tried turning it both directions. Nothing. I thought maybe I was half asleep and using the wrong key. I grabbed the spare from the drawer where I kept it. Same thing. It was like the lock had been replaced from the outside. I stood there for a moment, just staring at the knob. My heart started racing. I yanked on the door handle, checked the bolts, tried the lock again. It was jammed. New. Not mine. I called Naveen immediately. No answer. I called again. Straight to voicemail. I texted him, voice trembling as I typed, "Me. The lock has changed. I'm locked inside. What's going on?" No response. I banged on the door. I tried the windows, but the balcony was enclosed and far from any other unit. I had no direct neighbor, no one to hear me. My phone still had service, so I called my friend Aditi in Bangalore and explained everything. She stayed calm, tried to reassure me, and told me to call the police, but something stopped me. I don't know why. I wasn't sure if I was overreacting, if it would make things worse, or if I wanted to wait and give Naveen a chance to reply. Maybe part of me still believed there was a mistake. Maybe the building management had done it, or a repair crew. I just needed answers. Hours passed, no response from Naveen. I called the Airbnb helpline next. After explaining the situation 3 different times, I was told that someone from their trust and safety team would follow up with me. Meanwhile, they suggested I stay calm and not leave the property. That part made me laugh. I couldn't leave even if I wanted to. I sat on the couch with the curtains drawn, holding my phone and scanning the walls, like I expected something to pop out. Every creak of the floor above made me flinch. Every time the fridge hummed to life, I thought someone was outside the door. I considered climbing down from the balcony, but it was a long drop to solid concrete, and I wasn't about to break a leg. At around 6 p.m. the doorbell rang. One short buzz. I froze. The peephole was useless. Someone had taped over it from the outside. I backed away slowly, nearly tripping over my own feet. My phone was in my hand, but I didn't call anyone. I just stood there, waiting, hoping it was a mistake. No knock followed, no voice, just that single chime, and then nothing. I waited another 10 minutes before inching back toward the door. I pressed my ear against it. Silence. But I could feel it. The way the air felt different. The way my skin prickled. Someone had been there, and they didn't want me to see who. I didn't move from that spot for a long time. My legs were stiff from standing, but I didn't want to go back into the living room. Didn't want to turn my back on that door. Whoever rang the bell had deliberately covered the peephole. That wasn't random. That wasn't some delivery person with the wrong address. That was someone who didn't want to be seen. Someone who knew I was alone and trapped. And now they knew I knew. I sat down on the floor, my back against the hallway wall, gripping my phone. I couldn't make sense of what was happening. Why would someone lock me in? Why mess with the lock if the point wasn't to break in but to keep me inside? I finally messaged Aditi again, this time with trembling fingers. I told her someone had come to the door, that the peephole was blocked, and that I was seriously scared now. She asked if she should call the police from her end in Bangalore. I hesitated again, maybe out of pride, maybe out of fear that it would escalate things. But after a few more minutes of silence, I told her to do it. I wasn't going to wait for another knock. I wasn't going to wait to find out who taped that peephole. She called me back 10 minutes later. "They're sending someone," she said, "but it might take a bit. You're not in a central area." I thanked her and hung up, curling into myself on the floor, listening to every creak and footstep in the hallway outside. Another hour passed. Still no call from Naveen. Still no response to any of my texts. The Airbnb team had sent me a generic message asking for a callback number and more details. I gave them everything I could, but it felt like shouting into a void. I kept thinking about the layout of the flat, trying to come up with another way out, but there wasn't one. No back exit, no fire escape. The only windows were the ones in the bedroom and kitchen, and both had bolted metal grills. The balcony's sliding glass door opened just enough to let in air, but not enough for anyone to squeeze through. It was close to 9 p.m. when I finally heard the sound of footsteps again. This time, they didn't stop at my door. I heard voices, male, low, and the faint crackle of a walkie-talkie. I ran to the door and shouted, "Hello? Is that the police?" A voice responded, "Yes." "Ma'am, please stand back from the door." Relief flooded through me so fast I felt dizzy. I backed away and heard them speaking on the other side, followed by a few minutes of silence. Then, the sound of something metallic being turned, a pause, and finally, the door creaked open. Two officers stood outside, one older, one younger. They stepped inside cautiously, shining a flashlight even though the lights were on. "You're the tenant?" the older one asked. I nodded, still shaky. "I'm Ria. I've been locked inside since this morning. Someone changed the lock." I showed them the messages with Naveen, the photos I took of the key not fitting, and the tape over the peephole. They examined the door, then looked around the flat while I stayed near the entry, trying to stay composed. After 15 minutes of quiet investigation, they returned. "The lock cylinder has been swapped, but the frame hasn't been damaged. Whoever did it had proper tools and access, probably from the outside. We'll need to contact the property owner," the older officer said. I told them I still hadn't been able to reach Naveen. They wrote down his number and promised to follow up. I asked if I should stay somewhere else, and they agreed. "Do you have a friend nearby?" they asked. I didn't. "We suggest finding another place by tomorrow morning. We'll file a report and talk to the building security, but this isn't normal." They didn't say it, but I could tell they were thinking the same thing I was. Someone had targeted me specifically. Someone had waited until I was inside, then changed the lock and blocked my view. That wasn't random. That wasn't a prank. That was a plan. I didn't sleep that night. I kept the front door open with a chair wedged against it and sat on the couch with every light turned on. I packed most of my things before sunrise. By 8 a.m., I booked a hotel closer to the city center and called a cab. As I waited on the front steps with my bags, I saw the building manager for the first time. He was a short man in his 50s, wearing a lungi and sipping chai from a steel cup. I asked him if he knew who had been in the building yesterday. He gave me a blank look and said, "Nobody lives on your floor except you, and no maintenance people were here." I asked about Naveen. He frowned. "Never met him." The apartment was locked for years before someone started renting it online. I stood there stunned. So no one from the building gave anyone access? He shook his head. "No. We don't have spare keys. Owner handles everything himself." I didn't ask more. I just nodded, thanked him, and got into my cab. As we pulled away, I looked back at the second-floor window. The curtain was drawn. Still. Heavy. Watching. Back at the hotel, I felt like I could breathe again. But the anxiety never fully left. I followed up with the police twice. They said they hadn't been able to contact Naveen yet, and his phone was either switched off or disconnected. Airbnb messaged me again and offered to refund my booking. No apology, no concern, just a refund and a suggestion to leave a review. I didn't write one. Days later, out of curiosity, or maybe something darker, I searched the apartment address online. A forum post came up from 2 years ago. A woman had stayed in the same building. Different unit. Her story was almost the same. Lock changed. No response from the host. She left early, just like me. The listing had disappeared after that, but now it was back, under a new name, with new photos, slightly altered details. Same layout, same host profile, just renamed. I tried reporting this again, attaching the forum link. Airbnb said they'd look into it. The listing stayed up for another month before vanishing again. I never got an explanation. Not from the police, not from Airbnb, not from Naveen, if that was ever his real name. But I've accepted that I won't get one. Some things aren't meant to be solved neatly. Sometimes, all you get is a warning you're lucky enough to escape in time. Now, whenever I travel, I carry a door wedge and a portable lock in my bag. I never stay in places without reviews. I don't care how good the photos look, how quiet the area is, or how polite the host seems. Because sometimes the scariest part isn't who's outside your door. It's knowing they already had a key. Which story setting scared you the most? Let me know in the comments. Hey everyone, thanks for listening. If you stuck around until the end, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and click the notification bell so you never miss a new episode. As always, I'm looking for more story ideas, so drop a comment below with any themes or experiences you'd like to hear next. Stay safe out there, and until next time, keep your eyes open.